The meeting is now live.
Thank you, Julie. Good morning. Welcome to this meeting of the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee. My name's Claire Wild and I'm chair of the committee. I'm obliged to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Members of the public will be able to hear the audio of the meeting and view the papers shown on the screen. This meeting is being held using remote technology, and should any committee member experience technical difficulties during the meeting, they should immediately contact the designated IT officer on the number they've already been supplied with. Everyone is requested to mute their microphones unless asked to speak. Please only use the chat function to indicate the desire to speak. Do not use it for anything else so that it's clear who's asking to speak. The debate has to be heard by those listening to the audio feed. As chair, I will interpret the council's existing standing orders in light of the requirements of remote participation, with advice from the monitoring officer prior to making a ruling. I will ask all members of the committee to confirm their presence and ask any disclosable interests they have in any items on the agenda. I will ask everyone that speaks during the meeting, including members of the committee and officers, to introduce themselves each time they speak. This is so that those listening know who's speaking. I shall now turn to the items on the agenda. Item number 1 is apologies. To receive any apologies for absence. Have you got any, Julie?
Yes, we have apologies from Councillor Winwood.
Right, and has he got a substitute?
No, he doesn't.
Right, okay, fantastic, thank you. Item number 2.
Claire, it's Councillor Roger Evans from Longdon. Had a message from Hannah Fraser to say that she will be joining, but she will be a little bit late in joining, but she will be along later.
Okay, so what you could do, which would be really helpful, is ask Hannah just to message me on the chat function, and then I will introduce her and ask her if she has any interests and everything. Okay. Is that right?
Yeah.
Thank you. So item number 2 is the roll call and disclosable pecuniary interests. Members are reminded to disclose any pecuniary interest in any matter to be discussed which is not included in the register of interests, and leave the meeting prior to the matter being discussed. I will now read out each member's name and ask them to confirm their presence and confirm if they have any interests. So I'll read mine out first, Claire Wild, and I can confirm that I have no interest in any items on the agenda. The next name I've got here is Joyce Barrow.
Present and no interest.
Thank you. Karen Calder.
Present, no interest.
Thank you. Roger Evans.
Present and no pecuniary interest.
Thank you. Hannah's going to be joining us a little bit later, so when she joins, I'll ask her that question. Thank you. Adam Mosley.
Present, nothing to declare.
Thank you. Cecilia Motley.
Present, no pecuniary interests.
Thank you. Peggy Mullock.
Present and no pecuniary interest.
And Dave Tremellen.
Present, no pecuniary interest.
Thank you. So I'll move on now to item number 3, which is the minutes of the last meeting. And these are going to be deferred to the next meeting. However, I am asked to remind you that there is a recording of the last meeting on the internet. So people should be comforted by that. Item number 4 is public questions. There's no public questions. Item number 5 is members' questions. So there's 6 member questions, and the first question has been received from Councillor David Vasmer. Are you present, David?
Yes, I'm present. Thank you.
Right, okay then. And could you just confirm if you have any interests on any agenda items?
No interest to declare.
Right, thank you. So if you could read your question, thank you.
Yeah, from my own casework, I'm aware of a number of planning enforcement cases which do not appear to be resolved or the breach is not judged to be significant. The impression I have is that Shropshire does not enforce planning conditions properly because there are not enough staff to manage planning applications and enforcement, So when resources are stretched, planning enforcement is neglected. Therefore, I would like the answers to the following questions. 1. Since the creation of structure as a unitary authority, could the number of planning enforcement cases currently be listed for each financial year, along with the number of cases resolved, the number of cases where no action was taken, and the number of cases where action was taken, and the number of cases carried forward to the following year? For each financial year since the creation of structure as unitary, could the number of staff allocated to planning enforcement cases be listed?
Okay, thank you. So I think we've got Ian Kilby who's going to read out the answer. Ian, would you like to introduce yourself and answer? Thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Claire. It's Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services. In response to the first question, we don't have data prior to 2017 as this wasn't routinely captured before that point. Figures since then for cases received and closed are included in the report that I'll be presenting later in the agenda. So if members are happy, I can take that point then and respond to any further questions that may arise. To be clear, there are no cases where no action is taken. All enforcement cases are investigated in accordance with the Planning Enforcement Protocol. That is the Council's policy. Most of these are resolved without formal notices being served, and that's either because there is no planning breach or because there is a minor technical breach where it wouldn't be expedient to take formal action, or a planning application is submitted in order to regularise that breach. In relation to Councillor Vasma's second question, the planning enforcement team currently consists of 2 formal enforcement officers, a temporary consultant enforcement officer, a business support officer that manages the administration of that process. But importantly, it is also part of every planning officer's role. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. So, Councillor Vasma, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, I mean, is the number of officers we have enforcing planning applications is that sufficient? That given the number of cases that that are being dealt with at the moment?
Ian, if you'd like to.
I think that's. Sorry, Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services. I think there's a balance here between, and this may come out in the report and discussion on the enforcement process later on the agenda, but you've got a resource, you've got a protocol, which is your policy on how the council investigates those cases, and you have actions that sort of flow from that. So it's a bit difficult to say, have we got enough? What I could say is that enforcement is one of those sort of elastic processes, in the sense that we could all be doing a lot of enforcement a lot of the time. I think the important thing is to look at the outcomes that are achieved and to look at your policy and for members to see if they are happy with the policy and the protocol that is applied. Importantly as well, I think the numbers in the report that I'll come to later show that we receive and we close as a council about 500 cases a year in round numbers. So there's a lot of work being done. Whether members or the community is happy with the outcomes of those breaches is a separate matter for sort of discussion, but those breaches are considered in accordance with your policy. But importantly, it's important to remember that formal enforcement action, the serving of formal notices, needs to be legally robust and defensible through that process, and those cases are checked by our legal officers in that respect. It's also important, and finally, to say that planning enforcement can be very time consuming. It can be time consuming for all concerned because often there's a lot of evidence that needs to be gathered in order to bring a matter to a satisfactory conclusion. And finally, it isn't a criminal offence to undertake work without planning permission where it needs it. And so there is always a judgment to be applied. I think Just in summary, I would say we've got the resource we've got. We are applying that against the policy, and it takes the time it does. I think what a number of members are likely to say is it takes a long time to resolve some enforcement cases, and I wouldn't disagree with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Ian. So the second question I have is from Councillor Ruth Houghton. This question is going to be read by Roger Evans. If you'd like to read it, Roger.
Thank you, Claire. This is Roger Evans, Councillor for the Longdon Division. Ruth's question, which she's unfortunately not been here to actually ask, is why hasn't the report of an interim report of the Improve Better Care Fund Rapid Task and Finish Group been published or placed on any scrutiny or committee agendas to date, given that there may be potential budget implications for this council? What progress has been made on this very important subject, given the focus on health provision during the pandemic? Thank you.
Thank you. So if I can ask Daniel Webb to read out the reply, and if you could give your title, please, Daniel, as well.
Hello, Chair. This is Daniel Webb, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. I'm afraid I don't have the answer to hand here. I wasn't asked to answer this one, I'm afraid, so I don't have the words, the response.
Okay, that's fine. I'll do this one then. Thank you. So Councillor Claire Wild, who's chair of the committee, I'm going to read the answer out to you, Roger and Ruth. I'd like to take this opportunity to update you as follows. We agreed to hold a task and finish group, and we hope to bring in witnesses from the sector alongside our colleagues from the CCG providers and health trusts. However, COVID-19 has placed a significant pressure on our system, and we have had to quickly adapt to the new challenges whilst maintaining our core business. This has also meant that we've had to work very differently and also focus on dealing with the ongoing pandemic crises. It was therefore not possible to proceed with the task and finish group in the way which we'd anticipated. One of the messages in the COVID guidelines was in relation to hospital and patient care. No patient should occupy a hospital bed if they were fit to leave hospital. The guidance stipulated that there should be no assessments without hospital settings and that all patients must be discharged within 3 hours from the time that they have been deemed fit to leave the hospital. The learning from COVID resulted in us doing things very differently and allowed us to review the IBCF schemes more closely. We took the ICBF paper to the HOSC on the 21st of September and the 9th of November, where we updated committee members of the IBCF schemes. Confirmation of the 2021-22 settlement is imminent, but the indication from central government is that the IBCF fund will be rolled over at the current level for a further 12 months. A further scheduled paper is going back to the HOSC in January. I hope this gives you the reassurance in relation to the points that you have raised. Now, what I said earlier, just before we went live, was that Councillor Ruth Houghton is entitled to a supplementary question that could be read out by Roger, but Roger said he'd spoken to Councillor Ruth Houghton and she didn't have a supplementary question. So I hope everyone is content with that reply. And I move on to the next question, and this question is from Councillor Roger Evans. If you'd like to present your first question.
Thank you, Chairman. This is Roger Evans from the Longdon Division again. Why is this scrutiny committee not being allowed to consider the council's budget? It is not on today's agenda and does not appear in the future work programme despite repeated requests. No examination is and has been allowed. We are being denied access to many papers being used to help build up the information needed to enable the budget to be arrived at. The budget put forward by the Cabinet will shortly be going out for public consultation, and for the first time that I can remember, this committee will not have been allowed any chance to look at it prior to that happening. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Roger. So Daniel, if you could introduce yourself and read out the reply, please.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Webb here, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. It is incorrect to state that the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee is not being allowed to consider the Council's budget. The committee determines its own work programme. The committee has not requested that it look at the Council's budget. Should it wish to, it can agree to do so when considering its work programme at the end of this or any other meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. So do you have a supplementary question there, Roger?
No, Chairman. I will follow it up, but elsewhere, I would like to go on to the next question. Are you there?
Sorry, Roger. Yes, I am. Yes, if you'd like to read out your question.
Yeah. Question 4 from Roger Evans from the Longden Division. Why has the Scrutiny Committee been denied until today access to any figures showing the position of the Council at the end of Q2, or what were the predictions it was making for this current year at the end of September? It is noted that most figures in this Q2 report are hopelessly out of date. It's the Council's financial position as at the end of September. In it, the prediction was that at the year end, it was expected that the 2020-21 budget, that's the budget for this year, of course, would show an overspend of 2.771 million. In the financial strategy report discussed yesterday, it states that the expected 2020-21 budget would show, and to quote from it, "We currently expect to deliver a budget which is close to balance for the 2020-21 financial year." End of quote. This is a scrutiny committee, and we are being denied access to papers that would enable us to do the work that our council expects us to do. Thank you.
Thank you. And same again, Daniel, if you could introduce yourself and respond.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Webb, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. It is incorrect to state that this Scrutiny Committee has been denied until today access to any figures showing the position of the Council at the end of Q2, or what were the predictions it was making for this current year at the end of September. The Performance Management Scrutiny Committee can request any figures regarding the budget that it wishes to. The report that has been presented today to the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee regarding Q2 financial reporting is a report to Cabinet. As such, it would be inappropriate for this report to be considered by this committee before it has been considered by Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, have you got?
I have a supplementary, Chairman, for that.
Okay.
This was discussed at the last scrutiny committee when I asked that the Q2 figures be produced at the last meeting and at the November meeting, which was the scheduled meeting for this committee, which was postponed until today, with the notes that the papers had to go to Cabinet first before it came to this scrutiny committee. The Constitution says that any completed papers this scrutiny committee can ask for. I asked for it, and it is on the recorded minutes that I asked for it, and it has been refused, and access was not given to this paper until it went onto the Cabinet agenda. This is a factual paper. It is there as facts at the end of September, and we were denied access to it until today and until the Cabinet papers were published. That is not agreeable, or under my understanding, with the scrutiny committee of which I was part of when I drew that part up as part of the Constitution scrutiny committees. Thank you.
So Daniel, if you could do the same again, introduce yourself and answer the question.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Webb, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. My role here is as Overview and Scrutiny Officer. In other words, I support these committees on behalf of the committee and its chairs. As such, I have prepared the papers for this meeting in time for this meeting. If Councillor Evans or indeed any other member wishes to request papers from officers, they're more than free to do so, but it is not my job to acquire papers for them for their day-to-day business. It is my job to prepare for this committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Roger, would you like to ask your next question?
Yes, Chairman. And can I say that this is not questioning the competence, the workload of any officers. It is the process that this council is following at this moment in time, and that is what I'm querying. I understand that legal advice has been given, so that's where I'm coming from. So question 5 from Roger Evans from the Longdon Division. It is noted that in Appendix 2 of the work programme for today, it lists a task and finish group set up by this scrutiny committee. In amongst its objectives is, and I quote, to understand the process and activity stages for developing the financial strategy and how these translate into the council's annual budgets, to consider and scrutinise the proposals and emerging plans for the whole financial strategy and the 2021-2 budget, including how they align to the 4 pillars. This will be through their development and their implementation, in particular for innovation and raising income. End of quote. Why has no meeting of this taken place during the last 9 months and no papers presented to it for looking at? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Roger. So, Daniel, if you could introduce yourself and read the response, please.
Thank you, Chair. Daniel Webb, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. Excuse me a moment, please. The task and finish group in question has not met due to the staff member who ordinarily managed the task and finish group taking a secondment in response to the current COVID-19 pandemic. As the purpose of the group is to track the development of the budget, it would be too late to convene this group in order to track production of the 2021-2022 budget. The Performance Management Scrutiny Committee can commission a fresh task and finish group to track the 2022-2023 budget setting, should it wish to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Roger, do you have a supplementary question?
No, Chairman, except that I think the answer emphasises the resources that this council submits and gives to scrutiny committees in order for it to work. It does not provide sufficient resources to enable it to scrutinise what the executive does and to hold it to account and to actually try and improve situation and questions that are being asked and will be asked. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, can I just come back there, please, Roger? Because I think in fairness, you know, the pandemic has been horrendous for everybody. And Shropshire Council, I think, have done a really good job in actually changing the way they work totally. And all the resources in pretty much every team in the Shire Hall have been devoted to the COVID response. So whilst I accept totally that perhaps we should have been looking at the budget, actually you have to weigh up the risks. And actually the risks to our residents and communities was higher than looking at the budget. And so I just think you've been quite unfair, Roger. I mean, you know, if you look through, and perhaps it's a question that we can certainly ask Andrew Boxall when he's there, that every department at the council have absolutely changed what they do. I mean, our place plan officers are handing out business grants. Our highways people are doing all the COVID responses in the town. The officers are doing all the resilience work. So I do think that is a little bit unfair. And in COVID-like circumstances, we could never have enough staff to deal with it. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there, Roger, and I will ask you to ask your last question, please.
Okay, I do have a reply, Chairman, but as you say, I will go on to question 6 without asking any supplementary for that question. Question 6. Why has this committee and many elected members been denied access to the numerous reports that have been presented during the last 4 months to the Economic Recovery Task Group? This group is looking at how we can assist the economy of this county to recover. This group, which has met several times, the last one being the afternoon of Monday the 7th of December. None of the reports received by this task and group have been available for this committee to look at. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to read the response and introduce yourself, please, Daniel?
Of course, Chair. Thank you. Daniel Webb here, Overview and Scrutiny Officer. It is incorrect to state that this committee and many elected members have been denied access to the numerous reports that have been presented during the last 4 months to the Economic Recovery Task Group. As much of the work of the group considers matters of a commercially confidential nature, it would not be appropriate for papers to be released into the public domain without consideration of this need for confidentiality. Following a request from members for more information regarding the group, officers are preparing a paper that provides an update to members of the work the group has carried out. The Performance Management Scrutiny Committee has never requested any information pertaining to the Economic Recovery Task Group. The committee can scrutinise this group and its work should it wish to. At the request of members, this topic has been placed on this committee's draft work programme for agreement by the committee, should it wish to, at the end of this meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Evans, have you got a supplementary?
Yes, Chairman, I do. On the Performance Scrutiny Committee meeting of the 10th of June, I asked the following question. I asked a question on the recovery plan. By way of a supplementary question, Councillor asked why all opposition councillors were being excluded from the 2 task groups which had been established when all other authorities were working cross-party in response to the COVID-19 crisis. I asked the question then for information. I asked the question why we were not receiving reports. So it has been asked for, and it's been asked for by me continuously in many emails to officers and yourself. And as I say, there have been a number of questions I have posed at this committee asking what is happening with this economic recovery and when would information become available. I do note that it's on the Cabinet programme for January to receive a final report. We have got a budget which was presented to the Cabinet yesterday, and how can we scrutinise and how can members know how that is made up if the economy recovery reports, which are finalised and have been shared with people outside of this council. So it is not to say it's commercially sensitive. It has already been shared with people who are non-councillors and non-council officers. So why has this committee not been shown it? And when we have asked for it, and I have asked for it numerous times. Thank you, Chairman.
Can I just ask you a question, Roger? Weren't you originally on that economic committee?
I have been denied access every time, Chairman, and in June you advised me to go to the Leader of Council to ask what was happening at the Cabinet. I did, and he chose not to answer it.
So, but weren't you part of the group to start off with, Roger?
No, I have never been part of that group. It was set up by the Cabinet, this and the Social Recovery Group, and it has 2 groups set up. There is 5 Cabinet members on each, and there is no opposition members on it at all. But there are some people from outside organisations who are members of it, including the parish and town council sector. Thank you, Chair.
Wasn't there a group that you and Alan Mosley were a part of to begin with, in the beginning?
Since this group was set up, Chairman, by the Cabinet back in the summer, I and others have been denied access to anything. We have never been part of it. The SALC, Shropshire Association of Parish and Town Councils, were invited to join that group, and they have somebody on that group. As elected councillors, we have been denied access to everything. I do have a set of notes that were presented to previous meetings, but they were not officially provided to me by Shropshire Council.
In the very beginning, you were part of an economic task force, I understood, with Alan Mosley in the very beginning.
All right, Chairman, this is the question 6. This group was set up specifically by Cabinet in the summer. In this last summer, we have never been invited to it, or I have never been invited to it. I have asked, as I quoted that question at the June 10th meeting of this committee, asked why we were doing it. Your advice was that it was out with the remit of this committee and I should go to the leader. I did. He has denied it up until now, access to it or access to any comment from it at all. What happens in the future, I do not know. This is one of the very, very few councils who have refused to take a cross-party approach to this.
Okay, well, my understanding, Roger, was you and Anna Mosley were initially when the pandemic struck, involved in some sort of group. But anyway, I'm going to leave it there and move on to item number 6, which is the Q2 financial monitoring report.
Chair, may I make a point?
Yep, of course you can, Alan. Yeah.
It's just that we're now 33 minutes into this meeting, and I've sat listening to some questions which I haven't been able to see, and some responses which I haven't been able to see, about things, most of which are on the agenda and could have been discussed as part of the agenda item, and also other things that could have been put on the agenda if the councillor asking those questions had thought about it beforehand and put them on the agenda for us to discuss. I think this area is something that needs to be looked at in terms of protocol.
Chairman, if I can come back to reply to Councillor Mosley, I did request them to go on this agenda, Alan, and it has been refused.
Right, we're going to move on now.
That deals with that one, the latter question, I suppose, but the others were clearly related to items that are on the agenda, could have been discussed during the agenda item.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you at all, Alan. I'm going to move on now, Roger. So we're moving on to item number 6, which is the Q2 financial monitoring report. Can the Director of Finance and Assurance please present this item? James, if you'd like to introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. My name's James Walton, and so I'll give you a quick introduction in relation to this report as Director of Finance, Governance and Assurance. So this is the Q2 financial monitoring report for the current financial year 2020-21. The first quarter report was considered by Cabinet in early September and was considered by this scrutiny committee in the middle of September. So there is a delay, certainly in relation to the timing in which these reports come through, but that has been discussed already. As at Q1, we were showing a revenue overspend which was estimated at just under £2 million. That position has now worsened between Q1 and Q2 and is now showing at just £2.771 million overspend. So the reasoning for that overspend is set out within the report, but just to draw attention to a few points. On page 4 of the report, there is a chart which shows the overspend position over each of the quarters. And at Q1, we have a kind of a safe zone, which is a green zone whereby any over or underspend within that kind of area is manageable within the council's overall finances. And at Q1, at 1.9 million, that was just outside that zone. So around about 1.8 million pounds is the value at which we would normally assume that the budget would come in at. And demonstrate it to be basically balanced. And this is because we're talking about a budget that's a gross budget of close to £600 million, and therefore to try and balance it back to zero is always a very difficult piece of work. In Q2, because that position has worsened slightly, it's now on the edge of the kind of the amber zone. However, it only needs a movement of less than £1 million in a positive direction to bring it back into that effectively balanced zone. And it was that reference that we were talking about within the financial strategy, which was considered by Cabinet yesterday. I.e., we're aiming for a balanced budget by the end of the year, which means within £1.8 million of zero, effectively. The basis for that overspend, as I say, is set out within the report, and table 1 in section 4.3 on page 4 sets out the various variances across each of the service areas. So you'll see from that the largest overspending areas are children's services, which is due to the number of children that are in care at the moment and moving into the system, which has been partly caused by the by COVID-19 pandemic over the year and the impacts that's had on lockdown of schools, etc. We're showing a very large underspend in relation to corporate budgets, which is close to £10 million. That's basically because a lot of the unring-fenced COVID-19 grant that comes in is sat against that area. So that's effectively a balancing figure for overspends that are COVID related, which is showing within some of the other service areas. And that's certainly the case in relation to place, which is showing a £5 million overspend. A lot of that is to do with loss of sales, fees and income across a number of the areas in that directorate. One area where there is an overspend showing, just to explain, £1.6 million overspend against finance, governance and assurance. Normally, when you look at that title, you would be expecting that to be a fairly kind of back office kind of service area, and you wouldn't be expecting a variance of £1.6 million overspend. The reason for that is because that's the area where the housing benefits subsidy deficit sits, and this is basically around where we are housing people, where people become homeless and we are housing them, then we can charge an element of that cost back against housing benefit subsidy. The amount of people going through the system and the difference between what can be claimed back and what is actually being paid out shows against the revenue and benefits service area, which falls under finance, governance and assurance. So that's not an indication of that particular service area. It's more a wider issue in relation to the number of homeless people that have presented over the year that's showing as an overspend. And it's that area which has grown significantly between Q1 and Q2, which is the real reason why the position has worsened at the bottom line between Q1 and Q2. So if that element of cost, which has grown by around about £1.7 million, if that hadn't happened, we would actually have seen a reduction in the overspend across the rest of the council. So the message there is action was taken to try and reduce the overspend from Q1. That has actually reduced the overspend by around about £700,000, but against that, an overspend against homelessness has pushed that back the other way, so we're seeing a worsening position by about £800,000. On page 5 of the report, it breaks down the additional expenditure that is relating to COVID-19 spend, and on the following page it then breaks down areas where there has been loss of income, and it shows the estimated grant that will be coming through from sales fees and charges, but also job retention scheme income as well that's been assumed against that. At the top of page 7, there's a breakdown of the COVID-19 grants that have been received by the local authority this year, and that amounts to just short of £125 million. Obviously, the majority of that funding wasn't council funding, it was the £91.7 million, which were business grants, retail, hospitality and leisure and small business grants that were passed out in the early part of the year. There's then a breakdown in terms of where we are in relation to savings delivery. Obviously, savings delivery has been significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, partly in relation to the market that's out there, the impact that's had on being able to take some savings proposals forward, just actually in the way in which the world has operated over the previous 6 to 9 months. but also the fact that staff have been redeployed to other parts of the business to deal with the pandemic, and that has meant that we have been unable to deploy those staff to actually deliver some of those savings. All of that's taken account of within the financial strategy and the proposals that we built into next year. So basically, some of those savings we can charge against the unring-fenced COVID-19 grant, so that helps. And in the longer term, we are still expecting to deliver those savings. It's just that it will take a little bit longer to deliver them than we anticipated, the reasoning being, as I've just said, in relation to COVID-19. So that on page 15, that then provides the overarching position for the council, and that overspend as it stands at the moment would then be charged against the council's general fund balance. The next part of the report then I won't go into in any detail, but that covers the capital programme. The point to make there is, again, the capital programme has been fundamentally delayed due to the world that we've been living through in the last 8 to 9 months. And so therefore, despite the fact this is a position at the end of September and therefore halfway, 50% of the way through the year, only around 20% of that capital programme has been delivered. That has benefits and disbenefits, clearly, but in terms of delivering the council's outcomes, delay in relation to delivery of that capital programme is a negative outcome in that sense. And then at the end of the report, it goes through the appendices which give the detail in relation to the individual service areas that are under an overspending as at Q2. So I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, James. So, Alan, you've been waiting very patiently. Have you got any questions you'd like to ask?
No, thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, Roger, you wanted to ask a few questions.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I also say that in reply to Councillor Mosley's question about putting things on the agenda, there were 2 members of this committee asked for things to go on this agenda. Even though in the Constitution it says that we could, it was refused. However, I will now talk about this item that we're now talking about now. I have a question for our finance officer, in that at a previous meeting of this committee, I asked for a copy of the return that we made to government, showing the claim for assistance of government that this council received to pay for some of the costs because of COVID and some of the income that we no longer receive because of COVID. For example, car parking and things like this. Got a copy of the report, and it shows there that at the end of August to March, we received £4.9 million of government, and I pay tribute to the government. They've assisted us and met a lot of our costs. So whatever the politics of it, the government have stepped up and helped this council to meet some of the costs. But there it's 4.9 million that we received there, and there was the money that we had to find from other reasons. Yet the chart on page 6 of the report shows in essence that all our costs and loss of incomes have been met. Have I read that chart correctly, please?
So if I can answer that, Chair, James Walton, Council Director of Finance. The chart that's shown on page 6 is trying to demonstrate the amount of a loss of income that has been incurred over the various service areas, and then there is an allowance which says we can claim back 75% of that income after a 5% deduction. So in terms of pure sales fees and charges income, we would not be recovering the full loss of income. However, there is also the job retention scheme, which is basically the furlough scheme, which allows us to claim back other elements of costs. And then finally, we have the unring-fenced grant funding. So this is about £23 million of funding that's been given, which is completely unring-fenced. So while there are some elements of, for example, say sales fees and charges, which are which cannot be charged against the sales fees and charges grant. So, for example, commercial income specifically is excluded from the sales fees and charges grant. Plus, there's the 25% that we can't claim back and the 5% excess effectively that we can't claim back. All of that, because the unring-fenced grant is by definition unring-fenced, we can charge that. We can charge it against that part. So what we're showing is there's about £9.6 million in terms of loss of income. There's about 5.2 million we can claim back in terms of sales fees and charges grant, 600,000 from furlough, and about 3.9 million from the unring-fenced grant. And together, that all then would demonstrate that we are covering that loss of income. The point to make, so the councillor is correct in that assumption. The point to make is effectively that unring-fenced grant is there to manage the bottom line. So we justify and we track where we're allocating that funding. But in reality, tomorrow, if another issue came up, we could shift that money elsewhere. The point is, it doesn't change the bottom line. We've assumed all of that grant is being applied, and we will just apply it in the way that's most appropriate.
If I can, Chairman, can I come back?
Yes, you can, Roger. Yes.
Councillor Roger Evans from the Longdon Division. On this chart that I've got for parking off street and on street. Our loss of income was, as you say, 3.4 million in round figures, and as far as part of the claim back from government, we claim back roughly 2.3 million. So the difference between those two is what you're saying there. For example, contributions from the unring-fenced COVID. That is the difference there, that we had to pay the 5% and the 25% and the formula that was applied. Am I correct on that?
That is correct.
Okay. If we look at Shire Catering, which is on this chart, shows that total forecast net loss of income 817,000, and we claimed 320,000 back from Shire Catering, and I see that you show 743 on this, and with the differences there. But in the previous quarter, April to July, it's showing that we did not claim anything back for Shire Catering. So during March and April, did we, April and then until August, did we not claim anything back from government when there was an opportunity to, and we did not start not charging against government until the August? Am I right in that, or what, please?
There you go, James, if you'd like to answer that.
Thank you, Chair. James Walton, Councillor to Finance. Okay, so the thing you have to remember is that there's a phasing in relation to the way in which money is spent, the way in which these grants appeared, and then the way that we can claim them back. So the reality is that if you take, for example, loss of income, that first 5% that you can't claim back for, you've got to build up that first 5% before you can then start making a claim, bearing in mind that the sales fees and charges grant didn't appear until the summer anyway. So none of that was eligible to be claimed back in that first instance. Then as that spend is being incurred, what then happens is you then start to take the 75%. Now, in reality, that Q1, we may well have been charging things against the unring-fenced grant because that's all that we had available to us. As a decision is taken then, for example, to claim against the furlough scheme, if that then turns out to be successful, and in this case it was, then obviously that frees up unring-fenced grant at that point, which goes back into the pot to be used elsewhere. If then sales fees and charges income becomes eligible, and as we work through the year, more and more of that 75% that we can claim back actually occurs, you can actually demonstrate that, you'll claim more of that, which then may mean that you claim less of it back from the unring-fenced grant. So your your assumption is correct in terms of we didn't claim back at that point in time, but that wasn't for any other reason than some grants didn't appear, some expenditure was not being incurred, furlough scheme was being applied for. There were a whole series of things that we were working through, and that's why you need to remember that Q1, Q2 the figures will be different, Q3 the figures will be different again. Fundamentally, the point that I keep kind of trying to emphasize is it's about focusing on that bottom line. We will apply all of the grant, and we are assuming that all of the grant that we have is being applied, and just the detail of how that sits against individual service areas may shift as we work through the year.
If I can, Chairman, can
Yes.
I come back? All right.
Yes.
Well, there's two more, and I've got nobody listed else as wanted to speak on this.
This isn't the Roger Evans Roadshow, though, Roger. You know, there may well be other people who want to ask questions.
Nobody's on the chat line showing that they Chairman, but anyway, I could quote a lot of figures on this, but I'm not going to go down that avenue. But as I understand it, and I'm involved with the school as well, the council chose not to claim any furlough of staff until well into the lockdown. So that £1.3 million of Shire catering, which was a net loss in the early part of this financial year, which could have been met, the council chose not to start claiming furloughing until later. So that 1.3 million we've had to put against the general grant, and if the council had claimed the furloughing then, it would have meant that that money would have been available to use for other purposes. Am I correct?
I can't comment in relation to the eligibility for claiming for furlough over that period. I don't know the detail in relation to how the service was being run at that point in time, but clearly in relation to the logical answer to that question, if other funding isn't available, then you have to apply other funding instead, and if more funding is available, then there'll be more funding available generally. So the logical point is correct, but in terms of the reasoning for that, I'm afraid I'm unable to comment on that. That would have to be a question back to the service area specifically.
My understanding is that we didn't start to claim for furloughing staff until the July. There was a decision not to claim the furlough payment until then. But my last question, Chairman, is in the report on page 3, under 4.2, it says management action is required in order to reduce the projected year-end overspend. The effect of any management decisions taken will be reflected in future reports. Can James inform us what management action has been taken in actually to bring the overspend down, or any other areas of saving that has been made by this council? Because obviously we have not seen the management action taken, but as a scrutiny committee, I think we need to know in order to understand how the budget has been built up for the next financial year. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. James, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. James Walton, Council's Director of Finance. In relation to the individual areas where management action have been taken, I suppose it's difficult to it depends on the individual service area, it depends on the individual action that's been taken, and there's all sorts of reasons and bases on which that could be undertaken. So in terms of the general themes that we're talking about here, there will be things like vacancies. Management action will be taken to manage vacancies over a period of time, which would mean therefore that there isn't expenditure being incurred in that way. That's been helped by redeployment that we've had over the short period of time, where we've had staff that are unable to work, unable to do the job that they were employed to do. We've been able to redeploy those into other areas. That has saved costs that would otherwise be incurred by recruiting staff, or perhaps bringing in agency staff if it was an emergency. So yeah, that will apply in certain areas, that won't apply in others. But as a general theme, that's one of the things. In terms of the impact of COVID. That has meant that the majority of council staff have been working from home and working from home pretty much full time. That's had an impact just in relation to printing costs, in terms of travel costs, seminars and meetings across the country that would normally involve train tickets or driving to get to those meetings have been held over Teams, which has significantly reduced the costs of things like travel claims, etc. Printing and all those sorts of things. Added to that, just efficiencies within the way that we are using some of our systems. Some of those efficiencies were expected to have happened this year, but given that staff are having to work from home, are having to work remotely, then some of those things have had to happen a lot more quickly. So, for example, the digital post room, so staff that were sending post around Shire Hall and spending time doing that are now scanning that post in. It's being emailed straight out to individuals' inboxes, and that then has cut out a lot of the kind of that kind of routine expenditure that would be incurred over a year normally. So those things were in train. Those things were planned to be delivered, but given the kind of the snap change that happened on the 23rd of March and then continued in terms of lockdown, etc., those things have been accelerated. So they're the kind of management action that have been taken alongside all the things I'm not going to talk about, which are around, within an individual service areas, decisions being taken by heads of service and managers in relation to how they can amend and change their service in order to bring down their costs in the short term. So that will differ from service to service, and clearly I'll be here all afternoon if I went through all of that level of detail. But those are the basic principles, and just to reiterate, that management action would have seen a reduction of around about 700,000 between Q1 and Q2 had it not been for the homelessness element, which I talked about at the start, which has actually shown that cost increase overall.
Thank you very much indeed, James. I've got Karen Bradshaw who'd like to come in now. Karen, are you there? Would you like to introduce yourself and make your statement?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Karen Bradshaw. I'm the Director of Children's Services, but I'm covering for Andy Begley, Chief Executive today. Just wanted to comment on the issue around furlough. Just to be clear, Shropshire Council did not choose not to apply for furlough in regards to Shire services. The initial guidance from government was that furlough was not available to the public sector, and that was their initial position. That then started to develop and change, and clearly where services were funded externally, as in the case of Shire services, then furlough started to become available for that. We must remember that those employees are employed by Shropshire Council, and the rules around furlough was that only one application per organisation could be made. So we had to ensure that all of our employees, including those employed individually and separately by all of our maintained schools, we had one single package. Hence there was a slight delay having the rules changed, and then us gathering that information together to make that single application for furlough. We acknowledge that there was a slight delay, but it was about making a single application, and it was we did not choose to furlough staff in the first few months. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Karen. I was going to come back and ask for a written response, but that was a very comprehensive response, so thank you. Is there anybody else who wants to ask any questions? I've got Roger who wants to come back, but is there any other members of the committee who'd like to ask a question? No? Okay, Roger, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you, Chairman. I won't disagree with Karen Bradshaw, but there were some other local authorities who were furloughing staff much earlier than Shropshire Council. And I'm involved with one school who wanted to furlough staff, much earlier, and they were refused until well into the period. However, what I wanted to ask a question of is from James again, and that is the LED lighting. I see in the Q2, it's estimated that £200,000 saving was not going to be obtained. Why is that? How can that be fetched back? And I see it's only limited saving in the next financial strategy. And shopping centres, are we covering the actual cost of the shopping centres? And have we repaid any of the capital sum that was used to purchase the shopping centres back into our reserves? If we had normally borrowed the money, we would have been paying that money back by now. So what is the position on the shopping centres and also the LED lighting as shown in this Q2? Thank you.
There you go, James.
Thank you, Chair. James Walton, Council Director Finance. Okay, so the LED scheme is progressing. There has been a number of pieces of work that have been taken through that, and a grant that's been applied for to take forward that approach. I think the issue in relation to LED lighting generally is about changing the street lights, and if it was just a case of changing the actual lights from non-LED to LED, that would be a fairly quick program and reasonably cheap and reasonably cost effective. The issue within Shropshire is that we have a lot of old columns, and while they are safe to actually change the lighting and then come back in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years time and replace the column is not an efficient way of managing it. But of course, replacing the columns is significantly more expensive than just changing the light. So there's continual reassessment of that, and the size of the programme is flexed on the back of managing that. In relation to the shopping centre, clearly a lot of work is being done in relation to the shopping centre. It was bought on the basis of an economic regeneration programme, so that piece of work was expected to take several years to implement, and we are seeing a shift in relation to the way in which the kind of spend profile and the income profile for the shopping centres has been built up. There is a focus on condensing a lot of the retail offer into the Darwin Centre, and by doing so, that would ordinarily mean that there is a bigger, stronger commercial offer from that particular centre, which would help in terms of generating income. Obviously, at the same time as reviewing and managing those shopping centres, flooding in February and COVID impact over the spring, summer, autumn and into the winter has meant that there's been a significant impact on retail generally. So what we've tried to do within the monitoring report is split the shopping centres between that kind of retail area, and that retail area has been hit, as I say, due to COVID and flooding, etc. So we've seen a reduction in income, and we have seen, as we all know, a number of big name national retailers that have gone out of business over the summer and are continuing to go out of business. So there's no hiding from the impact that will have. However, the other part of the shopping centres, which is around that kind of reconsideration, reimagining of some of the offer within those particular properties, that is being progressed. There is no expectation, there's never any expectation that while you are looking at reimagining and redeveloping in some ways extensive properties, that you're also going to be able to generate income returns from it. So the way that the shopping centres were purchased, this was a Treasury decision. So effectively, the funding was paid for as an investment. So in the same way as funding would be applied into another local authority or into a bank or international institution, effectively that funding was placed as an investment within the Jersey offshore the JPUT mechanism, the Jersey Property Unit Trust that own the shopping centres. So we bought units in that trust, and then we generate the return that comes from that. So as an investment, it is still continuing to make a return, and so on that basis, there is no kind of borrowing to repay. The fundamental principle is that investment at some point could mature in the future. In effect, you could offload it, and that would bring your funding back. There were no plans to offload it. That was not the basis on which they were invested in, that they were purchased. But nevertheless, that's the basic mechanism that's kind of that's in play. There was a council decision that was taken last year, which was a look at onshoring. If we do take a decision to onshore the shopping centres, then that would then have an impact in relation to the way in which they're financed. All of that, though, would be considered as part of the due diligence around that process. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, James. I'm now going to move the report.
Chairman, I still have some questions on it, please.
Well, I think, to be quite honest, Roger, you've had loads and loads of questions. I'm very aware that we've got other important items on the agenda, and you've been speaking for more or less the last hour. So I think if you have got more questions, then you can email James and the rest of the committee, and he will send a written response to you.
This is a scrutiny committee, Chairman, and it should be as long as it takes.
I agree with you, Roger, but it isn't the Roger Evans Roadshow, and you have had an hour of asking questions, Roger, and I think that is quite enough. So there's other members who want to ask other questions about other agenda items. So I just repeat, if you've got other questions, if you'd like to email all the committee and the officers, and they will supply you with the answers. The recommendation is to note.
Can it be noted that I do have further questions and I am being refused permission to ask them, please? Can that be minuted?
Roger, how many questions have you had? You've had about 25 questions, I think. That is not fair. If everybody had 25 questions, we'd be all here for 24 hours, I think. So I think I've been totally fair and even-handed with you, Roger. So I'm going to move the recommendation, which is to note the report. And I'm also going to say to James, if you could thank your officers, because this has been a terrible time for everybody. We really appreciate the way that they've worked, because everyone's pattern of work has changed, and everyone has pulled out all the stops, and we really appreciate it as a council. So do I have a seconder to note the report?
I'll second, Chair. Joyce Barrett.
Thank you, Joyce. Is everyone content to note the report?
Content, Chair.
Right, okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on to item number 7, which is planning enforcement. Can the head of planning services introduce himself?
Chairman, can I add that my objection be noted to the last report? I do not agree with it. I am against it, and can that be minuted, please?
If you want to vote against it, that's fine. I mean, I don't really see how you can, because basically you're undermining the financial officers of the council. But if you want to vote against it, that's fine, and we'll note that. So as I said, can I ask the head of planning services to introduce himself and present the item on planning enforcement, please?
Thank you, Chair. It's Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services, and I'll be speaking to the report about planning enforcement. Planning enforcement is the process of investigating breaches of planning control, and planning control exists for certain elements of development. It's important to note that there is development that can take place that doesn't require a permission from the council, and there are also works that take place which are not defined as development. So it's important to have regard to those things when we're considering enforcement. A number of activities that take place aren't subject to planning control. The process of planning enforcement is one that we operate in accordance with a protocol that's set out on the council's website, and that protocol was developed in line with the government's advice on how planning enforcement should be undertaken. There's a balance always between delivering enforcement in an efficient way, but the key words that are used in the government advice and also in our own protocol are that the principles of enforcement should be applied with expediency and proportionality. And what that means in short is that while all cases, and I'm picking up on what Councillor Vasma asked right at the beginning, all cases that we receive are investigated, there will be some which it is not expedient, when considered against the council's enforcement protocol, to take formal action with. Now, it's recognised that public confidence in the planning system could be quickly undermined if development isn't routinely monitored or unauthorised development is allowed to proceed without intervention. Now, the way I just wanted to pick up on that point, because I use the words routinely monitored. It's incumbent on the applicant in each case who has planning permission to comply with any relevant planning conditions. The duty sort of sits with them. The council hasn't had over the last 10 years the resource to routinely monitor every planning application that it determines. So we probably in Shropshire approve around 3,000 planning applications every year, and there are other sort of other consents and decisions as well, and there isn't the resource to routinely monitor the compliance of those. The way the duty sits with the applicant to develop their scheme in accordance with the planning permission they have, or listed building consent, or whatever the scheme is, and to comply with any necessary conditions. Now, where we pick up planning enforcement inquiries most often is where it is noticed by either a member of the community or a councillor or a parish council that there is a divergence from the scheme as approved or non-compliance with conditions, and that triggers the enforcement process. In Shropshire, we capture all inquiries through a single sort of gateway, and that's important because to maintain efficiency in the process, we need to make sure that all inquiries are received through a sort of single point rather than going through different channels such as officers, councillors, through parish councils. So we have a single gateway, and there's an online enforcement form that we ask everyone to complete. And those are then logged, referenced, and all cases, as I said earlier, are investigated. I think it's important. I'm just going to summarise some of the things that when we investigate, what constitutes a breach of planning control. So that can include, and I've included some points in the report for you. It's where something's being built without planning permission and it requires it, or there's an unauthorised change of use of a property from one planning use to another, or the carrying out of works to a listed building, or the felling of protected trees, and so on and so forth. It also includes the failure to comply with planning conditions, or to display an advertisement without advertisement consent. So that's just some of the things that constitute breaches of planning control. Some of the things that don't constitute a breach of planning control can be things such as parking commercial vehicles in residential areas, operating a business from home where the residential use is the primary one, matters such as boundary disputes, matters that are subject to a covenant, a legal covenant. That's a civil matter rather than a planning matter, or where that development is permitted. As I said at the beginning, quite a lot of development is permitted by virtue of the general permitted development order. So when we receive a planning enforcement inquiry through that gateway, on completion of the form, it is logged, it is allocated to an officer. And I said also in answer to Councillor Vasma's question at the beginning that we have planning enforcement is spread amongst all of the planning officers. We've got 26 officers that deal with planning applications, and planning enforcement is also part of their role. Those include senior officers and planning officers. They will undertake an investigation to determine if there's a breach of planning control and make a recommendation. Now, if there is a breach of planning control, we then have to determine whether or not it's appropriate to take formal action. And that decision is based against the protocol. And it's the council's protocol. So if members have questions about whether we are intervening sufficiently or taking sufficient, or whether there are a sufficient number of cases that are investigated formally, it's the protocol that's determining that. Now, previously, there have been questions raised about whether or not planning enforcement, and back to that public confidence point, would be more effective if there was a process of zero tolerance. So you could, through your enforcement protocol, say, well, we're going to apply this very, very rigorously, and we will formally enforce in most cases. Now, the advantage of that approach is that it gets a message out, and very, I suppose, very quickly people think, well, actually, this is an authority that will bring to task, in all cases, breaches of planning control in a formal manner. The counterpoint to that is it could have broader reputational implications for the council. It could be seen as indiscriminate, and also, and importantly, it would be contrary to the government's advice and about proportionality and expediency. I've included at the end of the report a short table, and planning enforcement is now, I know it's an area of great interest to councillors because they tell me, and you know, it's a great interest to parish councils as well for the same reason. We could produce quite a lot of statistics about the planning enforcement process, but what I've got here is just a very brief summary for you, very brief summary, because there was a question put to me that, well, how many cases are we actually dealing with? And you can see that we've got the data there for the last 3 years, and we've been receiving broadly around 500 or 600 cases a year, and broadly closing as many cases in the same time. So with the protocol that you have and the officer resource that you have, that's the number of cases that are being dealt with every year. There are always cases on hand. It's the same with planning applications. You will always have a number of cases that are being dealt with, and that's a figure that varies between 400 and 500. So I think it's important to note that we are receiving a significant number of cases, we are closing a significant number of cases, and we are dealing with a significant number of cases all the time. I wanted just finally to contextualize some of the points, because I think it's important in any sort of scrutiny process to look at not just the figures, but the environment that those figures are sitting in. And as has been raised on the previous item, the pandemic has affected many aspects of the council's activities, and enforcement is no exception. We have found throughout the pandemic a growing number of enforcement cases. You can see that in the report, the number of cases to date received this year is 460. And if you extrapolate that figure, if it continues at level, we'll have about 700 cases this year. And if that's the case, and you look at the time frame between when we started to collect this data in 2017-18, that would represent a 25% increase in the number of cases we receive. You have to ask yourself the question why that's happening. Is there more unauthorised activity? That could be a reason. Are people becoming less tolerant? That could be a reason. We've noticed throughout the pandemic, more people are at home, working from home. They are noticing what their neighbours are doing. Some of the neighbours are doing things that require planning permission. They're building sheds to work from in the garden, for example, or they're doing other lockdown projects that they didn't think that they needed planning permission for. And the neighbours who are sitting trying to work quietly in their house next door are noticing all the building work going on, and so they log an enforcement complaint. Just making that point. On a more serious point, the economic pressures of the pandemic have affected a number of businesses, and I suspect a number of people are now finding themselves in positions of economic hardship. And it's quite sad to say that a number of our enforcement cases involve people who are living or working in caravans that don't have the benefit of planning permission because they are finding themselves in a position where they don't have adequate housing. Now, I don't have the data to say that's directly as a result of the pandemic, but I'm just placing it in this context. So in summary, we are pulling data together, and I'm more than happy to sort of provide more information at members' requests on what we do with the enforcement process. I would say there is a lot going on with this team. There is more going on throughout the pandemic, and I would say it's important to bear in mind that it can take an awful long time to bring matters to a conclusion, and there are reasons for that. So finally, one of the most sort of typical enforcement complaints we get is of noise, and that noise might be associated with an activity where someone is working from home. Or the difficulty with noise is, unless it's constant, like someone's sort of operating a drill or machinery sort of 12 hours a day, and those times are easily captured. Intermittent noise, such as someone repairing a car, and they might be buying and selling cars for business purposes at their home, that's quite difficult to sort of demonstrate that there is a level of harm and activity if it is intermittent. And it's in those cases that we might be asking the complainant to submit a log of the activity, and for that log to have value, it needs to be captured over a period of time. And we'd be working with colleagues in regulatory services over this activity, over these matters as well. It isn't just isolated to planning. So in summary, there is an awful lot going on. We have provided previously training for members on planning enforcement, setting out the sorts of things I've talked about today, and we will provide that training again later next year. We have also provided a note for members and parish councils to help us help them use the process, and that was pointing people to our online service, so that we didn't have inquiries going everywhere, because that's frustrating for everybody. I'm not saying it's perfect, but there are. I just wanted to explain that there are reasons the enforcement service is configured the way it is, and there are also reasons why, if someone undertakes a breach of planning control, that we don't rush in and send the team round to sort of resolve it within the next day. If, for example, what has been done would be okay in any event. So, for example, if someone has put a fence up and it's 2 or 3 centimetres taller than it would be if it were permitted development, it would not, in my view, be expedient to enforce that technical breach. I hope that's helpful. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. So I'm just going to recap a little bit before I open it up to members for questions. I've got Joyce, Cecilia, Hannah, Alan, and Roger who want to ask questions, and Gwilym wants to come in at the end. But before I do that, Hannah, could you just confirm that you're at the meeting and that you have no interests?
Hello, Chair. Yes, hello, I'm here. I've got no pecuniary interest. Sorry to be a little late joining you this morning.
That's right, and that's just confirm that is Councillor Hannah Fraser.
Councillor Hannah Fraser, yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
Okay. Thank you, Hannah. Right, you're in the queue now. Before I start down the list of questions, I haven't had a question yet myself. During lockdown, I've had a lot of phone calls off people about permitted development. Now you can go on the government website about permitted development. It is a little bit confusing, and I just wondered whether it might be one of the things you'd like to do is to actually give members a bit of a training on permitted development. And also, is there, can somebody, I think they have done it actually, they've rung up the council and they've said, look, I'm locked down, I want to do this project. Do I need planning permission? Are they able to do that? So that's my first question. Thank you, Ian.
Yes to both. Yes, happy to provide guidance and training. We can log that one on permitted development. All I'd say, Chair, is that the rules keep changing. They've changed throughout the lockdown, as with everything else. We have been asked as a planning authority and to be more flexible through lockdown to allow the construction sector to continue, for example. And I know this is of concern to a number of councillors in the meeting, that construction management, construction working hours is a sensitive issue for communities. Against that, we have been asked to be very flexible for requests to extend working hours to make construction COVID safe and keep the economy going. So it's always a balance. So yes, we can provide some guidance on permitted development and perhaps some of the key changes. We can do that through a training session. The planning portal provides some very helpful online tools. There's a digital sort of house that deals with most domestic sort of inquiries, and you can just sort of click on that and say, this is the project I'd like to do, and get some basics of planning advice virtually. That's the planning portal. Sorry, Chair, you asked, just remind me the second point of your question.
Actually, I can't remember the second point, to be quite frank, but I think it might well be that, you've seen enforcement cases increase by 200, and it might well be that a lot of these are people who are doing projects at home. I'm just speculating over that, really, Ian.
Very possibly, very possibly.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to move on to Joyce. Joyce, you've got the first question.
Thank you very much. Councillor Joyce Barrow, St Oswald Division. I'd like to ask Ian Kilby, when members are informed of enforcement notices via email, it states confidential. Can I ask why? And following on from that, is it possible to put enforcement notices online and have live updates put up? One of the reasons the published parish councils and members have issues with enforcement is because there is no feedback or very little feedback, and therefore, rightly or wrongly, feel nothing is happening. Is that a possibility? Second question, we have a temporary consultant enforcement officer. Can I just ask, what is the cost of a consultant? We know they tend to be more expensive than proper, I want to say proper officers, full-time officers. So might that money be better spent recruiting a full-time officer? Does enforcement being done by our planning officers put too much work pressure on them and detract from the day job? Have you actually sought their opinion to see what they think? Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Joyce. Ian, would you like to answer the question?
Thank you, Chair. Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services. Good questions there, I think. In terms of the member communication, the first point is that enforcement investigations are confidential because they are protecting the council's position should it move to a formal enforcement position. In other words, we do not want to compromise the council's position should it decide to serve a formal enforcement notice. That's why those communications are confidential up to a point where that decision whether to formally enforce is taken, because a formal enforcement notice is a public document and they should be being displayed on the statutory register. So that's where a formal enforcement notice is served. I think what I will do, I've got my colleague Tim Rogers is also on this call and listening in, and he sort of manages the enforcement team directly, so he will be picking up on the discussion and hearing what is said. I think it's important that we have effective communication between the officers and the members, the structure councillors particularly, because the structure councillor is at the front end of a lot of the community interest. I think where we just need to be clear is what we can tell you that doesn't compromise the council's investigation, i.e. what we can tell you that should it be heading towards a formal action. And I'll speak to Tim separately about whether there are ways that we can communicate to you if things look like they are heading in a particular direction without compromising the council's position. The second point, temporary consultant, yes. Sorry.
Can I come back, please, Chair, on that particular point before we move on?
Yep, of course you can, Joyce.
Yeah, thank you. Before, when we were informed of an enforcement investigation was taking place, it was just us that was told as a member. But I've noticed over the last few months, maybe a year, that actually the parish council is informed, and therefore all the parish councillors. Why is that, if it's so confidential, that it's being spread a bit wider? Because surely that makes it less confidential. Thank you.
Thank you, Joyce.
Yeah, very good question. There you
go. The parish should be informed. The parish may have raised the inquiry, in which case we will communicate with them through the process. So when an enforcement inquiry is raised, it could come via a councillor, it could come via the parish councillor, or it could come via a member of the community. And they're all each required to give their contact details as part of that process, because that way we can update anyone who's raised an interest in an enforcement matter. We will communicate them at key stages in the process. So that might be why the parish has been notified. And it might also be, I don't know the detail of these cases and specifically, but it might be that we'd reached the point of taking a decision as to whether or not there was a breach that required formal investigation or not, or whether the case was being closed, in which case we would notify the parish and the local member. So it may be that the parish had raised the query, is what I'm saying. If that is not the case, I'm happy to sort of discuss that with you sort of separately, Councillor Barrow, if there are other things sort of happening. But we have a relationship with whoever has raised the enforcement inquiry, and we will communicate with those people, those people or that organisation at a key decision point. Are you okay if I move on to your other question?
That's fine, thank you.
Could I just add to that, Chair, please?
Yep, go on then, Alan.
It was part of the question I was going to ask later. I get notification through the planning portal when an enforcement notice has been issued, but I never ever get notice of the outcome, whatever it may be.
There you go, Ian. Would you like to respond to that?
Yes, thank you. I mean, I wasn't aware that you weren't being notified of an outcome. That's certainly something we should be doing. So what I'm going to suggest, and for any other members that have got that as a concern, especially as I've just said, it's important that we have the communication effective between us. That I'll take that away separately, and can I distribute my response to that through the scrutiny process, or would you like me to respond to? Because I think it'll be of interest to more than just Alan.
Yeah, no, I think if you do it to all members, actually, because I think it's something that everyone will be interested in. Thank you very much.
Would it be possible actually to make a recommendation on that it's looked at the end of the meeting, at the end of this item?
Yeah, let's yes, we can add that as a recommendation at the end. Let's get to the let's listen to what everyone has to say. Alan, have you asked your full question now, or?
Oh, Ian hasn't finished answering my question.
Well, I'm down on the list to talk later.
Yeah, okay, right. So do you want to finish answering George's question?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services. Councillor Barrow's second question was about temporary consultants, and yes, they would be more expensive to employ than someone in-house. I can only employ people against the budget that I've got. This isn't a vacancy in the budget. The consultant currently was funded by some grant assistance that we were able to get, and that consultant, so they've been externally funded in that sense, and their role is specifically towards enforcement activity in the Green Belt, and that was a government initiative. So that's that point. And your third question was about sort of pressure on planning officers. I think it's fair to say that not everyone likes enforcement. It does by its very nature send people into a position where not everyone is happy, and the officers are walking into that situation. But as a starting point, I would say that probably the best person to investigate a breach of planning control, particularly where it's arising from a planning application that's been granted that might be being built out differently, is the planning officer who dealt with that case, because they know what they've agreed, and they are familiar with the site. And that's why we say the planning officer deals with the first investigation to determine whether or not there's a breach of control. And then if there is, they're probably best placed to put it right. And similarly if there isn't. But if it looks like it's getting more complicated, then we will bring in one of our enforcement specialists, which we have two, and they will help and guide the planning officer through that sort of more formal enforcement investigation process. So in summary, not everyone likes it. It does put a pressure on people. But it is within their job descriptions, they do the work, and that I think that they are probably best placed to deal with the initial inquiries in any event. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I've just finished, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian. So Cecilia, you're next down on the list.
Thank you very much indeed. This is Councillor Cecilia Mockley from the Corvedale division. Ian, thank you very much for this report. I think it's particularly helpful to have this brought up for us to have a bit of a look at, because I do think that historically enforcement has been a very difficult area for us, and I don't think any of us are convinced that we've probably done it in the best possible way, not least because we haven't been able to devote probably as much resource to it as we would all like. So we've had to do it the best we can, and I do very much appreciate that. I would just comment that I think that there is still confusion, particularly among parish councils, about what constitutes a breach and what doesn't, because often they will get one of their residents coming along and saying to them, you know, this is terrible, somebody's doing something awful in their back garden, or they've just built this monstrosity, whereupon the parish council is expected to leap into action. Then they tend to alert enforcement. They fill in the form. They don't like the form. I have to tell you that, Ian. One of the reasons why they don't like the form is that they're asked how they feel or you know, how about the proposed breach or the supposed breach that they're presenting, and their response to that very much is, I don't feel anything. I just have noticed that there is something going on which shouldn't be. So I was just wondering, I think it's in your paragraph 5.5 that it might be worth having another look at that and seeing if it can be slightly rejigged so it doesn't ask that question. The other, there are various bits of this. One of the things that I'm wondering, Ian, is it possible to use technology a bit more when it comes to updating parish councils, in particular about the progress of enforcement action and indeed members? Because I think what must be very difficult for officers is if you've got people badgering them, as it were, by saying, I reported this to you, you know, 3 weeks ago and I haven't heard anything about it. And I just wonder whether something could be, the planning portal could be used to actually try and have a section which updates on the progress of each enforcement action as it goes along. And if there's absolutely nothing to report, then hopefully it can be removed from the system quite quickly once it's been reported, and that at least will help them understand that this is a lengthy process. It's not something that can be done just in a week or two. I've had to deal with some rather difficult planning enforcement cases, and I think the most difficult one that I've had to deal with recently, over which I have to say I had admirable support from officers, particularly Tim Rogers and Julian, the enforcement officer, was this business of noise. Actually, this was just briefly for members, I won't take up your time. This was a motocross track which was put in without planning permission in the AONB, and the noise concern to a lot of properties which lay below it was considerable, as well as some, I would say, damage to the scenic quality of the AONB by carving a great big motocross track out of it. And we did go through a very lengthy process to actually try and get this sorted out. I think the reason that the officers managed to actually bring proper enforcement to bear on this was probably because we had a situation where the residents actually were given noise monitors, and they monitored the decibels and discovered that they were way over what they should have been. So in other words, they had very concrete proof that there was a breach. I would actually like to know what goes on in other situations, because I've actually been approached by somebody else about a similar situation, not in the AONB, but again a motocross, again making an awful lot of noise. And I believe various members have this problem. So it would be helpful to just have a view about how does one deal with motocross and the effects of motocross if you're not in the happy position that my particular case was of being in the AONB, and what action can be taken and how quickly can it be taken, because very often as things grind on, they carry on with their motocross and it carries on absolutely maddening people. So I do think that enforcement is something where we do need public confidence, and I think it's very difficult sometimes to instill public confidence because enforcement takes a long time. That's why I'm thinking that maybe if we can think of ways of speeding it up and doing that through technology, that might be helpful. And also, I do think that people need a better understanding of what is permitted development, what is a breach of planning condition, and particularly the parish councils, because then I feel that the pressure would slightly come off the officers, the planning officers and the enforcement officers, and just give them a little bit more breathing space on this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Cecilia. Before I get Ian to come in, I mean, I think this is obviously we're just looking at the performance aspects, and I do think that this would benefit from having a really good going over by your committee, Cecilia. And also the motocross thing is quite interesting because, of course, the government guidelines says they can operate for 12 or 14 days before we get involved, which is something I think that does need looking at. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services. Councillor Mockley raised three things, I think, in that I've got. The first was about the planning enforcement form and the reluctance or otherwise of parish councils to answer the question about Councillor Motley said how they feel. The question is, what is the harm? Is the question, and how does it affect you? Now, that question was put on as a means of trying to filter out a large number of inquiries that may have just simply been a neighbour dispute. So it's very easy to complain about something we don't like. We'll get the council involved. They'll sort out the problem that I have with my neighbour over there, whatever it is. And that question about harm was to try and sort of define, well, how is it affecting you? The fact that the neighbours put the fence up a little bit taller than it should have done, or for example, where I would agree with Councillor Motley, it doesn't strictly relate to an organisation submitting an inquiry on behalf of the community. And in that case, it doesn't affect them, but they could simply answer that question. It's been reported to our community that it affects them in this way, but could you please investigate it? We can think about the wording of the questions that it allows an organisation to respond, but it shouldn't prevent them from completing the inquiry, provided the harm somewhere, whoever is experiencing it, is captured. The second point I've got is about this sort of tracking and updates, and I think this is a common theme running through the process. We will have to look, I think, at what we can provide. It's recognised, and if you have a look at our enforcement protocol, it says we will update you. We set the expectation there. We set the expectation that we will update you when there is a key decision, and that doesn't mean every week. And if you've got an investigation where we're collecting data that might take some months, you can see how there's an opportunity there for frustration to build, because a decision hasn't been taken because we're collecting information. And the reality is, to everyone on the call or listening in, is that people will, if they are frustrated, continue to raise queries and say, where is this at? Or what's the current position with? And I've got, I receive these, and I'm sure the councillors on the call receive these fairly regular. What's happening with this? So I think it's a fair point, but a way of doing that might be to be able to find a way of showing the status of the investigation, so that it sets the expectation. And I haven't got the answer to this here and now. We need to think this through, and it will need some consideration as to, well, if for example, it's pending consideration. If you look at all councillors will be familiar with the planning portal, and you'll see that the status of planning applications is granted, refused, or pending consideration. And that pending can be for months whilst the application is concerned. I think what Councillor Motley is asking for is a more refined version of the pending status, so that we can say we're in this stage and it's likely to take this long. That might help a parish if you say, well, actually, we need to collect some data. We've asked the individual to monitor the noise, for example. We expect this to take 2 or 3 months, because we need that level of data to determine whether or not there's a problem in having regard to the relevant guidelines. That might help set the expectation with the parish council or the complainant, whoever that is. So I've made a note of that and take that away about how we can provide more informed interim updates for whoever is raising the question, because the benefit of that is that it reduces failure demand, and by that I mean all of those calls that we all get, which says, "Where's this at? Where are we up to?"
Yeah, quite.
So, and that is a failure demand because someone's expectation hasn't been set, or isn't clear. So I think it is a fair and reasonable point. Motocross, as a general point, you can use land for any purpose for 28 days in any year without planning permission, and there are a couple of exceptions from that. And one is a motoring event, motorsport event, which Cecilia mentioned with the motocross, and the other is like a market, a car boot sale. Now, how do you deal with that? It is in practice quite tricky because you've got to allow it to happen pretty much 14 days in a year because it's permitted to do so, record every activity so that you've got a log of it, accepting that there could be a disturbance in that time, and prepare and make everyone aware that 15 events would be unacceptable. The problem we've got is that there are many ways around this. It's a use of land, remember, that we're discussing. So in the case of a car boot sale, when car boots used to be popular, this is some time ago, we seem to have moved away from car boots, but car boots used to be extremely popular. And the way a car boot operator would deal with that time limit is just to move the site. So if you've got a farm and the car boot sale is in a field, you just move it to the next field and have 14 sessions on that field, or another planning unit. And I'm just making the point that there are ways of extending the effect without requiring planning permission, which continues the concern. Now, how do you deal with that ultimately? Well, given that it's permitted development, the only recourse is to withdraw the permitted development by virtue of an Article 4 direction. So that is a formal legal process where you can withdraw someone's rights to use their land. They can claim compensation against the council for that if that's seen to be unreasonable. And think of the difficulty there. Where would you draw the boundary? If it's a motorsport activity, and I'm familiar with the case that Councillor Motley referred to, a very sensitive location, AOMB, would you draw a line around the whole AOMB? I'm just making a point, because that would affect many landowners, and many of them say, well, I've got no intentions of running a motocross event, or whatever. Or do you do the whole of this landhold? I'm just saying it could be quite difficult in practice to go down that road. So there will be some enforcement activities that do cause problems which will take time to resolve, but we did get there in the end. Now the point I think in this case is it wasn't simply a use of land, I seem to recall. There were physical works to the ground to create the course for the motorsport event. So again, I'm using it to illustrate a point, but I hope that clarifies that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Ian. Hannah, you're next up with your question.
Thank you, Chair. Just before I start my question, I have just done a bit of Googling around Register of Planning Enforcement notices to see what comes up. You can't find anything for Shropshire. Swansea have got a Register of Planning Enforcement notices. It seems to me that to have something on the website that just, had a list of what was being investigated, what had been enforced, what the notices were, should be fairly simple to do and would be, I think, be welcomed by everybody. My question is really around really what is perceived as a lack of willingness to enforce from the planning department, and perhaps a sense that some issues are trivial when residents really don't view that they are. So Abbey Ward is affected very much by the Weir Hill development, so getting on for 750 odd houses now, I think, permitted there, and a long-running construction programme. as you know, Ian, the residents there have recorded now 772 breaches of the construction environmental maintenance plan. So that was a condition of planning that controlled things like dust, noise, times for delivery. It's a school route, so the lorries weren't supposed to deliver during key times that school traffic was going to be very active. And essentially, over the time of construction, the developers have not adhered to best practice. They haven't controlled their emissions from the site. They haven't controlled deliveries and construction traffic in the way that they should have. And the perception from the public is very much that the council is too slack and it's not willing to use its role in enforcement to ensure good practice on site, and that the developers are just sort of allowed to get away with it because you know, the council doesn't seem to view the breaches of the planning condition, which is what it is, as sort of serious enough to warrant a stops notice or some such thing. So that's been going on for some time, and now we've come to the point in the development where the first half of the site has been built out, and there's a planning condition that says they must have an access road up to London Road, which public traffic and construction traffic should be using. And the developers have gone past the number of houses that they're required at the point at which they are required then to open that road. But the road isn't open to the public and is only open to construction traffic during construction hours. But last week they recorded 73 HGV movements up Preston Street, which is the route that HGVs are no longer being supposed to take. They should be using the other road. So again, there's there was one formal complaint put in by the residents. They've put in another formal complaint around the fact that this planning condition is not being adhered to by the developers. My question really is, how seriously really does the enforcement team take these issues? Because the perception from residents is that they're not being taken particularly seriously, and that the leeway is always given to the developer, and that there are powers that the council could be using to really ensure better practice on sites, but also to make sure that some of these impacts that were conditioned out of the planning process, you know, the development was only given permission because the impacts were supposed to be prevented by conditions. So the planning process has already deemed that the impacts are not acceptable, but the council doesn't seem to be willing to enforce. So I'd like to hear your views on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. There you go, Ian. Would you like to reply?
Thank you, Chair. Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services. Thanks for the question. I'm just mindful that we're dealing with a live enforcement case, and I will answer it as best I can, the general elements, but the specifics I don't think it's appropriate, because we are in an enforcement investigation to talk about the detail of that in this meeting. Is that okay? I think Councillor Fraser does raise some very important and relevant points. We've got here a construction site and we're dealing with construction impacts, and it's the construction impacts that the existing community is experiencing, and this will apply. I'm talking generally now. Experiences most. And that's, you know, it's things like mud on road, deliveries, HGVs, noise, disturbance.
Dust is a big one.
All the things that a construction site has. Now, the general advice is that the development sector needs to get on and be able to implement its planning permissions in accordance with the relevant conditions. And where there is a breach of the conditions, those are investigated, and and will be dealt with in accordance with the protocol that I've referred to before. Now, I think Hannah's question is getting to, well, when do you say enough's enough? You build up, and I think this is a case in point, a pattern of behaviour. and we've probably got enough information now to take decisions in relation to this case, but I don't want to talk about the detail of that here and now. The point that we're trying to get as well is collecting the evidence, and there are a number of things that the council can do to get that. We get evidence submitted by the community, we put that to a developer, and we get a response to that. But short of having someone sort of cited, recording all of this on the ground, if we're getting a different point of view on that, it can be difficult to take it to the next stage. So what we are thinking about is that we might need to provide a surveillance to confirm what is happening in particular sites of this nature, and surveillance can take a number of forms. So it might be a camera to monitor activities. It might be, I'm talking in general terms now, it might be sound monitoring equipment. Our colleagues in regulatory services, for example, have got specialised equipment that they will lend out to people experiencing noise levels, so that that can be measured and set against the relevant, to see whether it constitutes a statutory nuisance. So there are things we can do, and I'm going to suggest I speak to Councillor Fraser sort of outside this meeting, because that is a specific live case, and I don't want to compromise the council's position in that case. Her other point, though, about the register, we should be displaying any notice that is a formal enforcement notice. We won't publicly share all every complaint we receive, because until a notice is served, it's an informal sort of investigation. And the requirement, the legislative requirement, is to keep a record, a statutory register of the formal notices. So that should be available, and if it isn't, I'll take that outside this call, such that it is. I think, if I make just one final thing, I think something we can do better is publicise more of the cases where formal action is taken. We did do this, and just to reassure members on the call, we've been to court several times. We've used injunctive behaviour. We've served formal enforcement notices. We've prosecuted people, but we don't always publicise when that happens, and I think that's an area we could do more of to sort of get the message across that Shropshire isn't a soft touch in relation to enforcement activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Hannah just wanted to come back briefly, I think.
Yes, thank you. Really, just again on the impacts of construction, and I think publicising enforcement decisions would be really helpful. By way of an example, 2 sites either side of Abbey Foregate. One was the Heath Houses, which was a huge demolition project and a build, and the other was McCarthy Stone on the other side of the road. Very similar setting. Absolutely no complaints from residents with the first one. Heaps of complaints, constant problems, including setting fire to the pavement with petrol on the second one. So clearly developers have a range of practices, and some developers are good and prevent impacts from their sites. So it's possible not to have dust impacts, it's possible not to have unreasonable noise impacts, it's possible to demolish a huge amount of buildings without creating a dust problem that the residents mind about. So it can be done. And I think the issue really for me is that if a blind eye is turned to kind of poor or not quite good enough practice, developers just think that's what they can get away with. And there are plenty of developers out there who will get away with it if they can. So I think that some stricter, especially for the big sites where the impacts can be long lasting and felt by many people, I think that stronger action does need to be taken. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So I've got Alan Mosley, Roger and Dave Tremullen, and then Gwilym's going to round it off. So Alan, would you like to ask your question, please?
Yeah, Alan Mosley, Castlefields and Ditherington. I was going to ask about the issues that were raised by at the very first question, and they were resolved. But I do think we need to have more information coming through about the outcomes. And I also agree with what Ian was saying and Hannah, that you need to publicise where enforcement actually takes place. Although it seems that it doesn't actually happen very often, because 10 or 16 outcomes from 600 or 700 complaints doesn't seem a lot. Let's hope that's because goodwill and reasonableness applies in terms of convincing whoever is transgressing the rules actually puts it right. But I would just like to ask a couple of questions. Do the officers apply any sort of priority in dealing with the cases that come forward? For example, do they give more attention to conservation areas and ANOBs and things like that than the normal run-of-the-mill in terms of the allocation of their time? And are all complaints actually recorded? I know if you look at crime statistics, only a certain proportion of crimes are actually, even though they're reported, only a small proportion are actually recorded. Is that the same with these active issues that are taken up? Because I'm sure I'm aware of a few vexatious complaints made by neighbours and against what's happening in their vicinity. And are there any statistics on the numbers involved in that? But I do think you need to make more of reporting what you're doing and letting us know what you're doing and informing the public about progress on matters. I have been following the Weir Hill one on some Facebook pages and also in the press, and I don't think we made a good job of convincing people that the regulations are being enforced appropriately.
Thank you, Alan. Do you want to come back, Ian?
Thank you, Chair. Ian Kilby, Head of Planning Services. I think Councillor Mosley again raises some good points there, and I think it's something just in relation to those points he's raised. We do prioritise inevitably, so the officers will go and immediately respond to the case where there's a report of someone demolishing a listed building, for example, or cutting a protected tree down that's subject to a preservation order, and they would do that against the unauthorised shed that's been put up in the neighbour's garden. So yes, we will prioritise. All complaints are recorded, and there is more information, data we could provide about that and the nature of the complaints and where they sort of come from. And this is it's quite a rich scene. For today's session, I was just asked to provide an overview of the planning enforcement process. And it seems to me that if we could probably get into this a bit further as well through some more training and development, both for members and for parish councils potentially, which I'm happy to offer. In terms of those formal notices, the enforcement notices are put in that table. There are other notices, a range of notices that are served, and you can, as Alan says, reach a number of conclusions from that. At one end of the scale, you might say, well, Shropshire doesn't take a very serious view of enforcement. It's not formally enforcing. Another way of looking at the same statistics would be to say, well, actually, it's resolving a lot of matters with the applicants, with the community against its protocol. A lot of the outcomes, or all of the outcomes, are assessed against the protocol, which is on the website, and I encourage you to have a look at it if you're not familiar with it, because that's the policy against which Shropshire takes its decisions. Thank you, Chair.
you very much, Ian. Right, so I've got Roger down next. Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Claire. In relation to previous comments and questions, yep, parish councils are informed of planning enforcement on a confidential basis, and I fully support that they should be, because they need to know what is happening in their area. But it is confidential. They and myself are never informed of the results of anything, although I note in the report in 5.6 that recommendations with most cases are made within 8 weeks. It would be good if the recommendation, no action, whatever, doesn't matter, if that could be reported to the parish councils and the local member, because we are often asked what is happening by the parish councils, and the Shropshire councillor, I would think, has to say, have no information. I've asked for it, and I have brought it to the attention of appropriate officers months ago several times, and they have agreed there is no protocol, nothing in place to actually inform members about the results of any planning enforcement. But I would also draw members' attention, and Ian, to 5.7, where it says we will not communicate outside these key decision points, that those reporting enforcement issues are welcome to communicate directly with investigating officers for updates. How can parish councils communicate when they do not know which officer is actually investigating it? They're only informed that a planning enforcement is taking place. Parish councils and local members need to be informed about what is happening, because we are out there at the sharp end answering questions, and people ask us, oh, what's going on over there? If we are aware of planning enforcement cases there, we can not inform that member of the public, oh, that is subject to an investigation or anything like that. We're not allowed to even say that to the member of the public asking us that question. If we know it's finished, we can say, oh yes, it has been looked at and everything is okay. That would finish it. We are left in a minefield of saying, sorry, I cannot pass any comment because it's confidential. So can Ian take that away, and please see if there is a way for members to be informed, and parish councils, of where we are when that recommendation is made, whether it's for no action, whatever. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Roger. And I think actually that there's more to be done here by a long chalk. Right, Dave Tremellen, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Dave Tremellen, member for Highley. It's really, I'm in a difficult position because I really don't want to mention the particular case, because there is a degree of commercial confidentiality attached to it. It's probably something that would best be raised in whatever Cecilia comes up with. I think both Tim and Ian will know what I'm talking about, but my particular concern is the distinction. There was a clear breach of a planning condition, a clear breach, and yet when I sort of got enforcement involved, I was told that they were pretty sort of laid back about it because the impact of the breach had been mitigated. I cannot for the life of me understand how you can mitigate a clear breach, especially as I raise the issue of this cumulative impact. There's planning permission for other premises. If those other premises come forward, the same planning condition that's being breached by this particular company attaches to those buildings, those potential businesses. So in other words, it makes a nonsense of them. So the fact that this potential breach, they've mitigated the impact of that breach, but the actual breach still exists. I can't for the life of me see how the hell you can justify that and sit back and be satisfied with the fact that the case is being, if you like, virtually closed. Is that clear or not very clear?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, Dave. Do you want to briefly answer that one, Ian? Because I'm very conscious of time.
All right. Thank you, Chair. Firstly, happy to have a discussion with Dave outside the meeting over the specifics. As I said with Hannah Fraser on the specific cases. So I'll speak about the general rather than the specifics. A breach can be mitigated if the mitigation is acceptable. It doesn't mean the breach goes away, but let's use that. And I'm only using this as a point of illustration.
Local plan cabinet decision. Called it in yesterday afternoon.
Is
on the cabinet on the council website. It says call it expired.
Roger.
I've tried ringing Joe up to just check with Claire. If it can be changed, okay. I understand it has to be booked in and everything like this.
Can you mute Roger? Roger, who are you talking to?
No, we can't hear him.
Yeah, no, okay, well, okay, so I think we just need to disregard that. Okay, Lee Chapman's muted him. So, I'm going to ask...
Hang on, Ian hasn't finished yet.
Okay, Ian, do you want to...
very briefly, the fact that there is a breach doesn't mean it can't be mitigated if the mitigation is acceptable. We may have different views as to what's acceptable. So, you know, I use that example of the fence that's too high, and I'm just using that as an example. You know, so there may be a breach because it's higher than it was agreed to be, or higher than requiring planning permission. But we can choose whether or not to take action or not. Sorry, that's not the example I wanted to use. Oh, imagine painting that same fence. Say someone had painted the fence sort of bright pink, and we have had cases like that. We might consider that we have an amenity issue. If they painted it another colour, which wasn't our preferred colour, but was suitably mitigating the impact of that, we would say, well, okay, on balance, that's probably all right. It doesn't get around the fact that there's still a breach, but it softens the impact of that. And there is a judgment there to be taken, and that runs all the way through the planning enforcement process. There are judgments to be taken as to how far you go, and your policy is sort of set in your enforcement protocol. Thank you, Chair.
It's that cumulative effect, though, because it concerns activity.
Yeah.
Concerns activity. I think you possibly know, I don't know whether Tim does, but I mean, excellent follow-up from the team.
Thank you.
Actually, to go back to what someone else said earlier on about members being informed about the progress of enforcement actions, I was chasing the enforcement team up about their apparent lack of follow-up, only to be told by the enforcement team and sent a list of all the 22 occasions they contacted this particular complainant. Now, had enforcement kept me up to date on that, I would not have then gone back and sort of, you know, torn a strip off them. It's the creation of that. It's the impression it creates. And really, you know, you're your own worst enemies in a lot of respect in that regard. Yes, Ian.
I was just hoping I may come back, Chair, through.
Yeah, of course you can. Yeah.
Because it was a point that Roger raised as well. I think I would absolutely agree. It's in the officer's interests when to provide a level of communication that helps the local member understand where things are, subject to not compromising the case. And I'm going to take this away outside the meeting anyway and see what we can do to improve that, because it's recognised that you councillors are at the front end of a lot of these enforcement issues, and that won't go away. As I said, look at the context we're in, the pandemic and so on. So I will take away from this, regardless of what scrutiny determines, to look at the communication and how we can improve that for members. Thank you.
I think if it, excuse me, Chair, but if it's probably best to take this up with Cecilia, perhaps, but this idea of this mitigation of a clear breach and the potential it has, the potential cumulative impact it has on future planning applications. And planning applications within just a matter of yards of this particular breach. I can see any solicitor who's looking into perhaps going forward with the development of those new premises would pick up on this and challenge that condition that is attached to that planning application. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we can take the specifics, Dave, outside this discussion over that case, if that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so Willem, I believe, did a task and finish group on enforcement, and he's now the portfolio holder, and he's been listening and taking notes all the way through the meeting. So I don't know if you want to say a few words, Willem.
Thank you, Chair. Yes. Do you want me to sum up on what I've heard? Have we heard from everybody yet, or just talk about the tasks, the informal?
I mean, I think, to be quite honest, Gwilym, we need a break in a minute because we've been at this an hour and a half.
Okay.
So,
all I was going to say was we did an informal administration task and finish on this. It wasn't a formal one, which was across about 10 or 12 members. And we looked at the whole purpose and role of enforcement, and it involved some members who had some serious enforcement issues. The main outcome of that was that we believed that the enforcement procedure we were running was fit for purpose, but it also brought out the fact that we needed more training for members, and that's what brought out the training programme which Ian ran about 18 months to 2 years ago, which I've also asked to be run post-elections. Like this morning, we have heard about issues, very poignant issues and hard issues that affect members. You know, big development sites, AONB issues, and such like. Please do not move away from the fact in the last financial year we closed 627 enforcement notices against 608 received. But it's obviously the hard ones that are going to be the issues. But this has been a really useful session this morning, and I thank you, Chair, for bringing it. What's come forward to me is communications, the use of technology, and these are the things I will be taking back with Ian when we meet, which we do on a regular basis. The other thing, whilst I've got you here on the call, I just want to say, since the pandemic started, our planning officers have been business as usual, working from home, and they went to working from home overnight. There are local authorities not too far from here who just shut down in April and did nothing for 2 months. Now, I'm pleased to say that our planning officers have kept Shropshire going. We've kept the business rolling, and I'm really pleased on where the figures are going this year compared to where we thought they were in July. And I would publicly just like to take this opportunity to thank them for the hard work they're doing and the diversification in the way they've worked. However, to finish off, Chair, I'm more than happy to take and listen to whatever recommendations you come forward with, and happy to take those forward and listen and talk and negotiate with Ian, depending on what they are. Thank you.
okay, thank you very much indeed. So yes, Ian, we've got the report to note, but actually I think Gwilym's right. We ought to email all the staff on behalf of the portfolio holder and the committee and actually thank them for working through the pandemic, because, you know, I think Shropshire Council as an organisation has worked really, really hard to help people. Now, the other thing I was going to say was I do think that we ought to put this some of the elements that have come out of this discussion today over to Cecilia's committee. So I recommend that we ask Cecilia to have an in-depth look at the issues that came out of this today, especially the permitted development, which of course comes from the government. I think that's it really. What does everyone think? Is everyone happy with that? Or Cecilia, are you happy with that? Can't see Cecilia there. The other thing I was going to say was, obviously, Gwilym's going to be talking with Ian and probably Cecilia as well. So let's hope that we can iron out some of these issues.
Chair, sorry, my screen froze for a second. Just to say that if it's the wish of the committee, I'm very happy to take this on. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. So does anybody disagree with what I've said? I think that's probably the easiest way to go around it. Everyone content with that approach? Okay, thank you. So what I'm going to suggest now is, because we've been here nearly 2.5 hours, and I think we're only meant to do an hour and a half without a comfort break. So what I'm going to suggest is that we take a 10-minute break, or we come back at 12:35, so that it gives people chance to actually grab something to eat and get back to the meeting. We've only done 2 items and we've got another 3 to do. So is everyone happy about that?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, Julie, you're happy with that? You can organise that, yes?
Yes, can I please remind members to mute your microphones, as this meeting will still be being broadcast during your 10-minute break.
Okay, thank you very much, Julie. Thank you. See you in 10 minutes. Bye. Hello, Julie. I'm back now. Just checking that everybody is back in their seats.
If members would like to confirm that they are back.
Karen Calder here. Sorry, Joyce here. I'm back.
Oh. Is that Roger on the phone again, or? I'm just going to give everyone a minute, and then we'll proceed to item 8 on the agenda. Can I just ask everyone to mute their microphones, please? Right, I think we've had our 10-minute break now, so we're moving on to agenda item 8, which is the digital transformation programme. And the officer present for this item is Andrew Boxall, who's head of technology. Can I ask Andrew if he's on the call now? And
yeah, I'm here.
Yep, thank you, Andrew. And if you'd like to proceed with your presentation, I don't know if we can get your presentation up on the screen or.
It's fine, I'll share it. It's okay.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Thank you.
There we go. So, hello everyone. Thank you for having me along today. It's really an amazing time digitally. It's a really difficult time, but it is an amazing time. So I just want to quickly talk you through some bits. These are only a couple of slides. Apologies, these only came out this morning. I've got a 4-month-old baby, so I've not had the easiest time of an evening and weekend. I was going to work on this over the weekend, but he didn't sleep, so sorry. But it's only a bit for prompts, really. So ultimately, the digital transformation programme gave us the tools to transform, and we have spoken about this quite a lot, and I've talked about this at this forum before, but it gave us a platform or several platforms that have enabled us to work in a different way. And I think it's interesting that in previous discussion points in this forum, we've had people mentioning bits like this. So, hats off to planning, to working from home very, very quickly, and that team have been excellent and really exemplars in adopting the technology. But we were able to put that technology in place a few years ago, so we were able to do that. So it's a combination. It's IT providing services that enable us to work in these new ways, which I think we've done well, I would say. And then people being able to adopt them. So I've been really proud of that. With COVID coming, we were in a fantastic position, albeit one that we didn't wish we had to be in, but as a council to move rapidly into a digital world. So there's the obvious bits, like working very soon over Microsoft Teams, and who would have thought that we'd have everyone on Microsoft Teams as quickly as we did, and that was amazing. And in the report that was shared with you, you've got some of the figures on there. But there's bits that people won't have noted. So there are certain line of business systems, they're like specific service IT platforms that are used that were never made to be used from people working from home or in the cloud. And we had to very, very quickly move those into a position where people could use them so services could carry on functioning. So there was the obvious bits that everyone's seen, but there was a huge amount of work that happened in the back that people wouldn't have been aware of. And then things like we were always planned to be able to enable at least 2,000 staff to work from home. Suddenly we're being told 2,600. So that's a strong position. We were able to ramp that up quite quickly thanks to the investments again. But we were aware of some councils that had planned to have maybe 400 people work from home. So suddenly they had to go up to 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, and that was just not possible for them. And alongside all this, obviously, we were supporting the schools, the NHS. There was a huge amount going into it. So I think ultimately that's the thing that we need to remember. Digital transformation gave us tools that have enabled us to change. And I will give some examples of that in a moment. I think what's really key with our transformation program is recognizing that actually technology is just an enabler. I say just, I don't want to do a disservice to our work, but it enables us to work in a new way. But one of the things that's really helped with that is our approach with change champions. And for me, it's really notable that we won an award for this. So lots of councillors will be familiar with your IT business partner, Abby, who does a brilliant job supporting councillors. And we've got 4 other business partners, including one who is now been commissioned by the STP, Sustainability Transformation Partnership with the NHS, to specifically support them. So they pay for his role because they recognise that Shropshire Council is further on technically, so they're able to have some of his time to support them to try and get them up to a position that we're in. I think that's really notable. Alongside the business partners as change champions, we've got digital champions and the workforce digital strategy that went live in January. Who would have thought we'd have achieved almost everything that we set out to do in that document by the end of the first year? But having a digital champion in every team has been really key, because lots of studies into technology acceptance and change have noted that we need people that understand both sides of the argument, because you've got technology, this is how I can work, and you've got the service specific, here is a problem we have, that technology can help. And that's been really great. So having people across the council supporting that. And we've done 4 cohorts so far, with another one scheduled for early January. And again, it's notable that the NHS have noted how well that's been going, and they've had people on the recent cohort and they've got people booked on for the next one. And that's our increasing shift in supporting one another and having a system approach to digital, which I think has been really fascinating and hugely beneficial. So this is by no way an exhaustive list of stuff we've done, please don't think that, but I've just picked out a couple of examples which for me emphasise where we are and where we've got to. So in January we've got some bots going live, and if you're not familiar with a bot, it's a live text interaction, but it's all automated. So you could ask a question, it will give you an answer based on information we've put into it. It's a bit like FAQs you might find on a website, but far more advanced, because you could ask a question such as, what is the paternity policy? Or do you have a paternity policy? Is there a paternity policy? And it would always give you the same answer, because it would understand you're basically asking the same thing. So in January, we've got some of those going. The key with that for me is the fact that we've developed that using technology we have. We could have invested in external partners, we could have got consultants in to do it, but we've upskilled our teams to be able to do that. And it's the first of many bots that I'm fairly sure over next year we'll have a lot coming through, which is a big shift, because it's no longer staff having to answer these questions via email or other ways. We'll have technology doing it for us. Big shift for the ERP in January as well. There's a new dashboard going live, which will show all the key bits that people need to do. So processing, claims, holiday, pay slips, all things that people use a lot. So that'll be on the homepage. A significant one is the PPE management solution that we put in. I'm not sure how many people are aware of that, but as a system, ourselves and the NHS and partner local authorities, we needed a way of managing PPE very early on in the coronavirus pandemic. And we were asked as the technology group, is there something we could do? And we put something in place within days. I mean, I was up at 2 in the morning creating online forms for this, but very, very proud of what we achieved. And we've had lots of councils from across the country, NHS systems from across the country asking how we did it and what we did. And we got national recognition for that as an example of really like good or best practice. I mentioned MS Teams, but I do think it needs to be noted that the council was in a really strong position to adopt that. So yes, COVID has accelerated it, but we were already doing it. That work was already in place. We had a significant number of staff already on it, and training had been given, which allowed us to accelerate things in the response to COVID. I think the councillor portal is important, and that's about simplifying access to the myriad of information that councillors need, and that's notable, and you'll all be aware of that. Something you might not know too much about, which was mentioned earlier by James, is the digital mailroom. So digital mailroom is where, when post comes in, because we obviously can't influence companies and some partner agencies to not do things via post, that's now scanned, and that scan goes straight to the mailbox of the recipient. Now you imagine the time that saves, because we've got a huge scanner which automatically pulls this through and does it for you. That can get it out, all automated, fantastic, versus an individual getting the post, opening the post, scanning the post, saving the document where it needs to go. These are significant time savings that we're seeing. We imagine that time has been swallowed up by the response to COVID, but it's brilliant that we've been able to make the time saving. I've also noted machine learning on there, which is sort of a subset of artificial intelligence. We have set it up now in one service where the technology is there to extract the data from invoices and put it straight into another system. So again, we're using technology we've got and really changing the way that we work. Another key one, project control, a massive SharePoint site that shows us the projects. The local NHS commissioned us to do this because NHS England noted it as something very unusual and of real benefit, and that's been fantastic in the response for COVID again. And the last one is around use of data. For years, people have talked about the use of data. Andy Begley's a huge influence on this because he's seen the opportunity years ago and has been championing it with Lee and others, and we've been able to really push on that, and some work we did for ADAS got some national recognition amongst other things. So I think the point I'm trying to make with this is we had the platform, we had the foundations to really start changing things, and thank goodness we did when COVID came along, because we were able to respond in ways that we just couldn't have imagined before, producing dashboards that allowed us to see what's happening. You'd have seen the dashboards that go out about COVID on Facebook and social media from the council. They're a cut above the others that you get from other places, and it's because we've had a way of delivering this. So transformation has come on leaps and bounds. I'm really proud of where we've got to in the team, and that's really what I want to talk about. One thing I would like to just add, if you'll allow me, I just think some thanks and recognition need to go to staff across the council, because staff had, and this has been alluded to, but staff have had to not only support COVID, they've had to support themselves and their families. We've thrown them on a change journey at such rapid pace, and what's been amazing is just the adoption of it. I think what's been wonderful to see is there's been a real opportunity and need to support residents, to support businesses, to support people that we want to help. And technology has been the enabler to allow us to keep doing that. And that clarity of why we need to change has been so stark that people have really adopted it in ways that we couldn't have imagined. So hats off to staff across the council for managing that. So very open to questions if anyone has any now, please.
Thank you, Andrew. Yes, and I thoroughly agree with you. I mean, I think the staff over Shropshire Council have gone above and beyond, and really they've been incredible. And I've had loads of compliments about all the information that's gone out. But I will open this up now. Have we got any questions for Andrew? Right, okay. Well, thank you very much indeed, Andrew, for that. I apologise that you've had to wait so long. And we'll just note this report, and hopefully in a couple of months' time, if you could come back and just give us another update, that would be really, really interesting.
Yep, very happy to come back whenever requested and answer any questions, and you've all got my contact details, so please just ask away or go through Lee, however you feel appropriate.
Yeah, and can I just add a personal thank you to yourself, because I know how much work you've done, and you've been an inspiration to a lot of people, so thank you very much indeed.
If I could just intervene a moment, please. I think Councillor Morley has just indicated that she has a quick question.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, sorry to be slow on the uptake there. Andrew, thank you very much indeed for that report, and I must add my congratulations to everybody else. I mean, the speed at which the council transformed itself was absolutely breathtaking, and I think that the programme has really proved its worth, the digital transformation programme. Can I just put in a little plea to you? When you have a moment, and I don't imagine you have very many few moments at the moment, particularly with a tiddler keeping you awake all night, could you possibly turn your attention to the My Shropshire portal, which really doesn't work terribly well. It is not very receptive. It doesn't allow enough choices to be made when one's trying to report things to highways. And it's very difficult to understand exactly what has been sorted out because of the way that it reports back. So as and when you can get round to it, I think we'd all be very grateful for a bit of a really professional eye over that one, please.
Can I come back on that?
Yes, you can,
okay.
Andrew.
So just first of all, I think in terms of the transformation, I think credit is also due to Karen Bradshaw and Andy Begley, because when it all kicked off, they were very clear about the adoption of tech. So I should have said that. And that was really important, because some organisations were trying to adopt it from the side or down below, whereas actually we had it pushed from the top, which was exactly how it should be. So just one quick mention of that. In terms of My Shropshire, there's lots and lots of work going on this, and we have to decommission the previous system in Darwin, and that should be done by the end of February at the latest now, because there was elements on there. We've already scheduled changes to the way that you log on to that, because we've noted that the login could be better. So our aim is to streamline that significantly and adopt some of the better ways of doing it. And we actually had a meeting yesterday with Highways looking at some of the opportunities to change some of the information around the reporting. There are some limitations because of the two technology platforms having to work together, but please know it's a huge priority and we are looking at this. And we are looking at things such as a Power BI dashboard, because that will enable councillors to see what's going on and then pass that back to residents. But we are working on this and there's lots of us involved and we're looking at different ways of doing it. But yeah, it's a priority. So, but thank you for the information. I'll add that to the list of bits to look at.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I appreciate that. Thank you,
Thanks
Chair.
very much. So we'll just note your report and pass on our thanks to everybody. And thank you very much for coming. And I hope you get some good night's sleep soon.
It'll be fine. It will all be fine. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item number 9. We have the Q2 performance report. Now we've got Steve Taylor, who's the Intelligent Policy Team Leader. We've also got Lee Chapman. So I don't know which one of you is going to share the report. Lee, would you like to come in first?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you. Yep.
Yes, my understanding is Steve's going to present the report. I presented it yesterday at Cabinet and draw out a few aspects of the report that were of interest, but I'll be here to pick up any particular issues. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, and perhaps we'll come back to you at the end, Lee.
Okay, that'd be appreciated.
Okay, thank you. So, Steve, if you're there, could you introduce yourself, please, and give us your report? Steve Taylor.
Yes, Steve Taylor, Performance Intelligence and Policy Officer. As Lee just said, this is the Corporate Performance Report for Q2. It was presented to Cabinet yesterday. I'm going to pick up some of the sort of highlights and challenges, I think, from the report, which I'm surely sort of picked up again. But I think one of the key challenges as council, and it's something James said earlier, is a lot of activity for children's services, and that's been experienced by a lot of councils across the country. We have a high number of black children compared to historically. There has been some impact due to COVID with the courts delays in people leaving care, and there's also been a change of profile in terms of referrals coming in. During lockdown there was less referrals from schools and more from police, and as schools have reopened, obviously more referrals are coming in from schools again. From a performance point of view, I think the whole team in children's social care have been doing a really good job. They really understand their performance, they monitor it really closely, and they're tracking it all the while. So there's a lot of good work going on below the scenes in terms of the numbers tell one story, but actually what's happening behind the scenes is really pleasing. Another key challenge, I think, really, and it's not just for the council, it's across the whole culture, leisure, tourism sector, is obviously our visitor numbers to all of our services have been badly hit. And that's not just in terms of the services themselves, it's all the knock-on effect. So people not going to the theatre affects the visitor economy of the town, etc., and other parts of the county as well. But again, there's been some good work going on in the background. It's really pleasing, the library service, in terms of accessing e-services. The take-up of that has been really good. So it's been challenging, but the services are working in different ways, and the technology has enabled some of that to happen. One of the positives in some respects, in terms of, if you can say there's a positive about lockdown, is the road accident numbers have started decreased quite a lot this year. We did start report between 2016 and 2019 that the number of killed and seriously injured numbers were increasing. Since then, it started to fall. Road accidents have actually started to decrease over the last 2 years. So there has been a change, but that change has been more pronounced during this year. How that will affect in terms of our habits, obviously we're all working remotely at the moment. More people will be working from home. More people will be reluctant to use public transport for a while. So how commuting patterns will change and how the long-term effect that what that'll be, we're not sure yet. Another pleasing area in the report is the learning disability sector with adults aged 16 to 64 who are living in sort of safe environments with home and family. It was our highest ever performance last year. It's quite pleasing, so it's a really pleasing thing. There's been a positive long-term trend for the last sort of 6 or 7 years, so that's a good area. This cabinet report is the first time we've done it. We actually put a bit of a focus to try and bring to life some of these high-level measures which don't always reflect some of the good work that goes on. And for this time, we focused on adult social care for the first time. If we continue to do this type of reporting, I'm not sure, but this is a discussion to have with Andy and with Lee. But we asked adult social care to highlight some of the good work that's gone on. And obviously, we haven't been able to report delayed transfers of care during the year, but the work that's gone on in getting people out of and transferred out of hospital into suitable care, there's been some really good performance, a 64% improvement during this period, so that's been good. I think it's good to highlight the work that's been to support carers. Carers are such an important part in Shropshire. We rely so heavily on people's goodwill, and we've had to put in support mechanisms and commission support so people could have that support network, which face-to-face couldn't happen. So that's some good work there. One of our aims is to reduce admissions to residential nursing care, and the pilot 2 years ago for 2 carers in a car, I think just highlighted some of the good work that has gone on there. And finally, although not particularly Shropshire Council performance, we highlighted some of the good work at care homes done, and we just wanted to put that in. I just wanted to put that in to say thank you. It's been a tough year, and the work and support of the care homes and that industry, we couldn't, we would be struggling without them. So it's just nice to put something in there to recognise the work of carers and the work of care homes. So I'm happy to take questions. I'm sure Lee will be happy to take questions, and anything particular about service areas if any of the directors want to chip in as well. And that's it.
Oh, okay, Steve, thank you very much indeed. Is there anybody who'd like to ask any questions? No, would you like to say anything, Lee?
Only briefly, Chair, just to say how much I appreciate the work that the team is doing, and to bring to the committee's attention the appointment of a new post that will have an impact in this area. We've appointed a head of information and insight who will be working particularly in this area, looking at data standards and working to derive a much more systematic approach to the way that we manage information in the council, and how we derive insight from that data across the whole of the council. And certainly from my perspective, I think the ability to understand the implications of the data that we had and to make smarter use of that is a significant priority for the council, and something that we're going to be working closely on as time goes forward, particularly in relation to performance. So thank you, and thank you to Steve for presenting the paper so ably.
Thank you. Karen Calder would like to ask a question. There you go, Karen, if you'd like to ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, I left it a bit late to put in speak, please. I've got two questions. The first one is around the number of carers and the fact that we don't have a figure since 2011. And I'm wondering, how did we get that figure, and are we doing anything to accurately assess the current? You've said in the report that it's likely to be a lot higher than that. So that's the first question. The second question is Lee, you just mentioned there's been a new appointment and information, I can't remember the other bit of the title, officer that's just been appointed. Will he be picking up any roles within the JSNA?
There you go, Lee. Would you like to pick those up?
Yeah, happy to. I'm not aware of specifics around carers numbers, Karen. I'm happy to take that away and come back to the committee. What I would say, however, is that I think that some local authorities have a different approach to providing services to carers and oblige people to go through a formal carers assessment. That isn't always the case for us in Shropshire, because of the way that we commission the organisations that fund carers, and therefore having a definitive number of those individuals that are in Shropshire as formal or informal carers is often difficult to get hold of. What I would say, and it is referenced in the report, is that we continue to strive to publicise and promote the offer that we have across Shropshire for carers, in an attempt to establish and reach those people who perhaps for one reason or another either aren't aware of the support we offer, or perhaps don't see themselves as requiring support as a carer. As far as the head of information and insight, the new post, Alden Whitaker Brown, the gentleman who's joined us, my understanding is that he's looking at a range of areas across the council in terms of the way that we manage, handle data and derive insight from it. I'm not aware that he has a specific brief in relation to the JSNA, but I'm sure that if you'd like me to, I can request that question from our Director of Public Health for you.
Yes, please, Lee, if you would.
Thank you. We've got Steve Taylor has said you can answer the question about the carer numbers. Would you like to give us that information, please, Steve?
Yeah, sorry. The carer number that's quoted, that reason it's 2011 is the last census. That's the most accurate source of data in terms of number of carers. There will be another census next year. There's a lot of preparation going on in respect to that. So in March next year, there will be the next census that will update that data for us. We'll probably get that figure around about 2022.
Thank you, Steve. That makes sense. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is that it, Karen? You content? Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay. Cecilia, would you like to ask your question or make your comments?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Just briefly, and this is a fairly obvious one. As the rural champion, I am obviously pleased to see item 10, embrace our rurality there. I'm quite interested in the number of affordable homes delivered in rural communities, and I'm just wondering whether that incorporates all categories of affordable homes. That is to say, single plot exception affordables, as well as larger sites in the rural areas. And I just wonder if somebody could let me know about that. And also, I'm very much looking forward to seeing the outcome of the community and rural strategy, which I know was launched a little while ago. And once we get the evidence base of rural and community data, we really need to see some regular reports. I think I see that progress will be reported, but I think it's very important that we don't lose sight of this strategy. The trouble is that we do have quite a lot of strategies on quite a lot of things. I'm very keen that this really is a real driving force for rural communities, and particularly in helping rebuild rural economies post-COVID. And there was just one other thing which just struck me about this. Let's just have a look.
While you're having a look, Steve, have you got the answer to Cecilia's question about the makeup of the affordable homes?
Yeah, it's the data comes from the affordable homes team. As far as I'm aware, it includes all single sites, exceptions. They base their figure on communities of less than 3,000 people. So that's their definition for the rural count for this measure.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Okay, I would just point out though, Chair, that quite a lot of our market towns have fewer than 3,000, and it would be a shame if all these houses were just being developed in the market towns. Just because I know for a fact that quite a number of particularly exception site affordables are going up in the rural areas. So I just make that point. But thank you. That's all right.
Did you have another question, Cecilia?
No, it's all right. I've satisfied myself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we've got some recommendations here. And the recommendation is recommendation A is to consider the emerging issues in this report, which I think we've done. And recommendation B is to review the performance portal and identify any performance areas that would like to consider in greater detail or refer to the Performance Management Scrutiny Committee. So if everyone's happy with those recommendations, could I have a seconder, please?
I'll second, Claire.
Joyce, thank you. So is there anybody who is against the recommendations? Was everyone content with the recommendations? Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Lee, and thank you very much indeed, Steve. And have a lovely Christmas. So we now move on to item number 9, which is the Future Work Programme. Before we do that, there's two things I want to raise with you. Alan Mosley's had to leave the meeting, but he asked a question about a task and finish group. Daniel, did you see that question down the side?
No, I didn't, Chair. I saw that he left. I didn't quite catch the question. I think it pinged up, only a small portion pinged up.
It was in the meeting chat.
Here we go.
Yeah, have you got it? Could you reply to Alan and the rest of the committee about that, please?
Yes, of course I can.
Yep, okay. And I don't think Roger's on the call now, is he?
I'm not sure either. I'm struggling to.
I mean, I think just to clear up the confusion earlier on, I mean, I think my understanding is that in the first instance, when COVID hit, there was a high-level COVID group which included cabinet directors and opposition leaders. And that's what happened in the first instance. Unfortunately, there was quite a lot of leaks, and most of the papers ended up in the front page of the papers. So that's my understanding. So I thought I'd just clear that up while we're here. So the Future Work Programme, has anybody got any questions or anything that they'd like to put in the work programme, or do you want to just talk us through it, please, Daniel?
Oh, yes, please. I'd like to, before we sort of make a decision on it. Obviously, the work programme is in front of you. We've covered all of the items that we agreed we would do at this meeting. Just a few things, really. I had a request from the chair of the Lib Dem group and another member, Hannah, who sits on this committee, to ask to bring the economic recovery task group to the meeting. So obviously, I've penciled that in for January, subject to the committee agreeing that. You have on Also, as well, in January, you've requested a report, an update report on various sort of dog welfare issues. The officer who manages that team has asked whether you would consider delaying that until March due to staff pressures. So I put that request to you as well. I also note that in the course of this meeting, there's a request that we consider the budget in January. And finally, the other point I want to raise is that, as requested, you've asked for a verbal update on digital transformation at each meeting. And I would like to just challenge that a little and as to whether that's the best use of the committee's time. I think we've tracked this for a few years now in terms of sort of regular updates on how they're doing with essentially hardware and software implementation. And I know some members have perhaps suggested that we might want to look a little more broadly at how we actually use all of this kit and technology that we've invested so heavily in terms of actually transforming the way that we deliver services within the council. And that might perhaps be a more fruitful piece of work going forward, albeit time is tight because you only have at the moment 2 more meetings before our local elections. So 4 points there, I think, that you really need to make a decision on before we sign off the work programme for the next 2 meetings. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Sharon Calder there, who'd like to say something.
Just on the back of what Daniel was saying there about the digital transformation coming to the performance management meeting at every meeting, I think it's obvious that after today's lack of questions that we don't actually need to. This feels as though it's more about information gathering than opportunities to ask questions, and I'm wondering if we can receive that information in a different way rather than taking up officer time.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think I've said when Andrew was speaking today that we wouldn't see him for a few meetings. It was originally put on because Roger wanted it. Originally, we just had a verbal update, and then we used to get a paragraph. But I actually think we'd probably be just as well to leave them for a few months, and they can come back to us in the summer.
I would agree, 6 months.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Lee's obviously very much on top of it, so I'm quite content to do that. Cecilia, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I quite agree with you there, Chair. I don't think we need to see digital transformation paraded before us every single time. I think we need to let them get on and keep going on the very valuable work that they're already doing. So 6 months for me would be certainly about the right time frame. Just looking at dog welfare, I would be perfectly happy to delay this one, but at some point I think we should be looking perhaps at the effect of lockdown on dog ownership and also the knock-on effect of lockdown dog ownership on increasing pressure on dog rescue centres and shelters. Because I suspect that there may well be, as there have been in other parts of the country already, I think, some increases in dogs just being abandoned because people get them during lockdown and don't really know what they're taking on. So I'm not sure that we need really take up a huge amount of time with it at the moment, but I can see that it would be a useful topic to consider later on, post-election probably.
Right, okay, I'm quite happy with that. Joyce.
Sorry, can I ask a question? Is that something the council should be bothered with, though? Is there a council issue, dog shelters and dogs being abandoned? I know we have a dog warden, but it isn't really something in our remit. I thought what you wanted to look at, Claire, was dog fouling, dogs let loose, which is something because of public protection. So I just view it from a different place than Cecilia does. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, Joyce, and I think it's absolutely we want to discuss dog fouling and everything. I think what Cecilia's saying, and it's something that worried me personally, is that everyone wants a dog. Dog prices have gone up. People have been stealing dogs, and we're going to end up with a load of dogs being mistreated and on the streets, which is probably a consequence of an unforeseen consequence of COVID. So I think initially, we should talk about the dog fouling and dog control, but I think probably Cecilia's point will probably come into it to some extent.
Chair, if I could jump in, please.
Yeah.
Here, actually, the council has a number of powers and responsibilities with regards to dogs. It's not just obviously there's the issue of dog fouling. We have a role to play with regards to low-level dog nuisance and low-level dog attacks. There, obviously, as well, we have a responsibility to collect stray dogs and to sort of shelter them accordingly. And then finally, as well, obviously, we have a licensing role with dog breeders. So there are a number of responsibilities here, and I would envisage that any report to scrutiny would bundle all those up into one item. So it is a fairly meaty item. And you know, but there's nothing there, and there are no issues that members have brought to me that suggest that there's any particular urgency with any of this.
Okay, so the other question I wanted to ask you was, Roger wanted to include the budget in the work programme, but when does the budget go to council? Does it go in February?
February.
So we can't look at the budget realistically in January, because we've got the economic task force going in January. Is that right? So what would be the merit in discussing it in March? I'm just a bit. I mean, I don't know. I'm quite happy to do it, but why would we discuss it after it's been through council? And have we got enough time to deal with it in January?
No.
I mean, Daniel, what do you think?
That's a very good question, Chair. I mean, you'll have to forgive me. I think this is my first iteration of this with this committee, so I'll need to sort of do a bit more reading up on the processes with this. I was always my understanding that we looked at this before it went to council, but I could be mistaken in that. So if you were going to look at it before council, it would have to be January. If it was going to be after council, it would be March. So I think James is still in the meeting, so I think perhaps he can give a better answer than me. Well, perhaps he will be able to give a better answer than me.
Okay, James, would you like to answer the question?
Yeah. So James Walton, Council Director of Finance. So the report is due to go to full council for approvals. The strategy, the budget, everything will be approved at the end of February. At the moment, the financial strategy is being approved by Cabinet and is at the moment out to consultation, and that will end at the end of January, roughly, and then a revised report will go through to Cabinet on, I think it's the 8th of February. So there's absolutely no benefit in scrutiny trying to consider it after the end of February, clearly, because the budget would have been set by council. The optimal point would be between the 8th of February Cabinet and the 20 whatever it is of February Council. That would be the optimal date that scrutiny would look at it. But obviously, if you don't have a meeting in February, that's not at the moment achievable. But I think you do have a meeting on the 20th of January, if I've got the dates correct. By the 20th of January, we'll still be in consultation for the existing financial strategy that was approved by Cabinet yesterday. So there may be some value in looking at that, but that's kind of the only option you've got now, unless you set a meeting up in February.
Okay, thank you. Daniel.
Yeah, it would be very easy to set up a meeting in February between those dates, should you wish me to.
I'm open to suggestions from members. Do you want to have a special budget meeting in February?
Chairman, by that time, the budget will have been through, will it not, Cabinet and Council.
Oh, February Council, March.
Yeah. So I think.
So, I mean, I'm not sure when. I'm not sure when our council meeting in February is. James reckons end of
7th.
Yeah. So just to confirm, Chair, 25th of February is council.
Okay. I'm just not sure that. I mean, bearing in mind this it'll be agreed by Cabinet. There'll be consultation. Then it comes back to Cabinet. Are we slightly over egging the pudding here, or is this something we normally do? I just am not sure. Yeah, but I'm not particularly happy with, you know, going over it for the nth time if it isn't strictly speaking necessary.
Okay, no, I get that. Thank you, Cecilia. Joyce, did you want to say something?
Yes, and forgive me for this, and if Roger's listening, forgive me for this. What I would say is it's very late in the day. It's not going to change anything on the budget. The Liberals come forward with nothing usually of any real great depth. So I don't think it would make a lot of difference anyway.
Okay, thank you. So Daniel, you can just come back briefly.
Just thinking of a way forward that might perhaps build on this. I've been recently reading Sit for Guidance on scrutinising budgets and financial matters, and I did allude to this in one of my written responses to Councillor Evans earlier, that what this committee might wish to do is to set in train budget scrutiny for that would conclude with consideration in January 2022. So in other words, we would start tracking budget setting at some appropriate point early next year, so that we came to an informed agreement or an informed position around this time next year when we set the 2022 budget. And the obvious vehicle for that would either be this committee or a task and finish group, as agreed previously. So So I just put that forward as a way forward. I mean, the vibe I'm getting here is that you feel that an extra meeting for this purpose would be of limited use. So perhaps in March, say, a terms of reference for a task and finish group that set that began the process of budget monitoring or budget setting for the 2022-2023 might be a more fruitful use of the committee's time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very good idea, Daniel. And if you can get the terms of reference out, and then we can get on with it, because I think the budget. I mean, the budget is huge, obviously, and it needs probably a dozen meetings, and so a task and finish group is ideal so that we can have a really good look at it.
Okay. Chair, would you like to bring the terms of reference to the January meeting or the March meeting?
Yeah, I don't mind. You can bring the terms of reference to January meeting if you like. Okay,
Chair, I'll note that for the report.
Yeah. So was there a fourth question? I think we've done three.
There was 1, 2, 3. Yes, and obviously then agreement. Would you like the economic recovery the economic recovery task group to come to the January meeting? Obviously the proposal's there. From the Lib Dems to bring that, so it's for the committee to agree that.
Yeah, I'm quite happy for somebody from the task group. I mean, presumably a lot of it's confidential, so they'll only be able to talk in strategic terms. But anyway,
it's my understanding anyway that the officers are preparing a report anyway, so I'm sure that report can be adjusted accordingly for this meeting, and I think it'd be very easy for them to give an overview of the work and the findings of the work without betraying commercial confidentiality.
Okay, that's absolutely fine. So is everyone happy now with
just one last thing, sorry to keep bothering. I just want to be absolutely crystal clear. Are you leaving the dog welfare matters until after the election now?
I think possibly, because we've got quite a lot on the agenda, and it's a lot of work for you as well, Daniel.
Okay, fine. I will do that accordingly then.
Okay.
All right, brilliant.
Yeah, so that's everyone's in agreement about the future work programme, I think. Yep, no dissent. And the date of the next meeting, that will be the 20th of January. Is everyone happy with that?
Yep.
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 Okay, so thank you very much, everybody, and have a very safe and happy Christmas. And I will catch up with you all in January. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Chair.